Okay, we are ready to go.
Okay. I'd like to call this regular council meeting to order. I'd like to acknowledge before we start that all of us are located in various parts of our community on land, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit, many of whom continue to occupy our community and provide diversity and enrich our community. Madam Clerk, the invocation, please.
We meet to serve our community and endeavor to be worthy custodians of all that has been entrusted to us. Let us be concerned only for what will promote good government. May we bring to our council chamber minds that think and hearts that feel, so that in our deliberations we may display imagination, wisdom, and courage, and the will to do our work for the good of all.
Thank you very much. And the roll call, please.
All members of council are present, your worship.
I have a few announcements, and I'm going to start with a very good news announcement, which relates to word that we received yesterday afternoon about a free grocery giveaway at St. Michael's on Wednesday, January the 20th. There's a donor, private individual, who has been making donations, large donations of food in various locations in Niagara, and Fort Erie's opportunity came up recently. And through the efforts of Reverend Bill Thomas and Shauna Wolfenberg with Community Support Services Niagara, through the auspices of Matthew House, First Baptist Church, St. Michael's Roman Catholic Church, this opportunity is coming to Fort Erie, and it will involve essentially a market which will involve prepackaged grocery bags that will be provided to individuals who line up in a contactless drive-through format, and individuals will be asked to open their trunk when they arrive at the food stations, and the bags will be placed inside those trunks. All of the COVID-19 protocols will have to be followed. There will be a walk-up line for those who arrive on foot, but they are asked to practice social distancing. I want to thank, aside from those individuals who have been instrumental in bringing this to Fort Erie, the town councillors who reached out, in particular Councillor Butler, Councillor McDermott, Councillor Dubanow, and the other councillors, members of council, have supported this. Councillor Butler was able to tap into somebody obviously that you know or have done work with, Steve Murray at Lifto, and they are providing a lift truck and a lift pallet to assist the movement of the groceries from the truck that will be bringing it to St. Michael's off of the truck and then into an area where it can be utilized by individuals. And I also want to thank town staff and the fire chief for their efforts with respect to this, because there are some logistical issues that we've been able to assist with. So this is a tremendous opportunity, great generosity. I want to thank the individual donor and all of those whom I've mentioned before, and hopefully the community will take full advantage of this opportunity. I wanted to mention as well that in connection with COVID, that the vaccinations have started in Niagara, as most of you know. The public health has updated its website. It's a very informative format now, provides a lot of information, not only about the cases, the breakdown per communities, the number of active cases. It also is providing stats with respect to vaccinations throughout Niagara. So any individuals who are looking for information, want to know what the status of these things are, please go to the public health webpage. There is a link on the Fort Erie page, and we are showing Fort Erie specific stats and data on our webpage. There has been a bit of a delay in Pfizer shipments to Niagara. I mean, this has been a challenge across Canada and in Ontario. The number of vaccines that are being requested and required right now are outstripping the supply. That hopefully will be dealt with shortly, not only through Pfizer, which has internationally reduced its output in order to do some work to expand its capacity so that in a month or so they'll be able to ship out even more. There are other vaccines that are coming on that will be following Pfizer and Moderna, and hopefully when those vaccines are approved, we will be getting more here as well. There was a shipment scheduled for next week that is, I believe, is going to be canceled, but there are a couple of shipments in starting in February that may be slightly less than anticipated. The reality is that there's a tremendous need for these vaccines across the province and the country. In Fort Erie, the long-term care homes have been, Gilmore Lodge has had 100% vaccination for not only the residents, but I believe the workers. Crescent Park Lodge may now be at 100%. It was at 97 point something yesterday. And the others in Niagara that are long-term care homes are at other various stages of inoculation. So that continues to roll out. And I want to assure the public that Niagara Health, Public Health are doing all that they can. I know that there's been work on a mass inoculation plan because there's been follow-up outreach to municipalities with respect to locations. And there are efforts being made to put in place the actual vaccination clinics as the vaccines become available. So that's all work that is continuing. And for further information, as I said, check the Public Health webpage. I did want to go to one other thing. The town has been working on a variety of aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously since March, like everyone else. We've been doing the messaging, communications, the enforcement, all of the things that employers have to do, that employees have to follow. And so most recently, our communications coordinator, Janine Tesmer, has put together some videos which have shown on some social media platforms, but I'm asking her tonight, and I believe, Madam Clerk, that we've got this set up either through you or through Kelly Davis, so that we can show one of the short video clips that is trying to get out a new message in a new format so that the ennui that is developed over the months can at least be addressed so that people have something different and new to look at and to assist them in following the public health guidelines. So, Kelly, is that something that you can proceed with?
Yes, Mayor Redekop, I do have that video queued up. I'll just share my screen.
Thank you.
And that's it.
Thank you very much. So that was Joanne Ferricioli, who is our, as she indicated, community health coordinator. That was put together with Janine Tesmer's guidance. And there have been two previous videos. One that Janine did, she was the pilot for the initiative. Chief Melanson has done one, and there will be others. I'm going to suggest that when we get to ours, we should have a little music. And I'm going to speculate on what genre of music any of the councillors might utilize. But it'll be interesting, I think, if we can put a little music to that as well. But it's an interesting and it's a new way to get across the message that we're trying to get across. Plus, it provides additional information for members of the public. So thank you to the staff for working on that. And councillors, I'm warning you, your turn is coming. Okay, that's it for announcements. There is no addendum this evening. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Dubanow.
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting there. Yes, Your Worship. I have two this evening that both relate to the same matter. I have a conflict with presentation in Delegation 9C. That's the presentation by Michael Barker with Shift Landscape Architecture regarding the Spears Park Master Plan, and also report PDS-06-2021, which is the actual Spears Park Master Plan report, as I live in Spears Estates.
Right. Are there any others? So there is one, there's a notice of upcoming public meetings. We have the balance of our budget, council and budget committee meetings. The third one is Wednesday, February the 3rd, which will deal with the library and the general levy operating budget and assessment analysis. If there's a fourth meeting necessary, it will be held February the 10th, Wednesday. And all budget meetings begin at 6 p.m. They're obviously done via video teleconference. The budget bylaws will be dealt with Monday, February the 22nd, 2021, which will be the general levy budget bylaw and general capital budget bylaw. And there is a bylaw this evening that we're dealing with, I think, as my memory. Water and wastewater, I guess. Adopt the fees for water and wastewater budget. Okay, there's one public meeting this evening. It's in relation to the building code and the proposed increases in building permit fees. And that will be presented by Keegan Jennings, who is our chief building official. Mr. Jennings, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Redekop.
So my understanding is that residents can participate electronically in this public meeting by clicking on the link which is shown in our agenda. I presume that this was also part of the notice that was displayed when the agenda was published. Is that correct, Madam Clerk? And were there any other public notifications with respect to this meeting, Mr. Jennings?
Yes, Mr. Redekop, it was put in the public, in the newspaper, as well as the town's website, Facebook, and it did go out to our local builders.
Thank you. So, Mr. Davis, I presume that you're monitoring this so that if anybody wishes to gain access to the meeting, they will raise their hand or provide you with some notification that they wish to address council. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Jennings, then please proceed.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to share my screen for the presentation. So this public meeting is a requirement of the Ontario Building Code Act when the municipality is considering a change to the public or to the building permit fees. As we already spoke about this, the notice of this public meeting was provided by taking out an ad in the Fort Erie Post on December 17th. Providing the notification in the paper satisfies the town's legal requirements under the Building Code Act. In addition to the legal requirements, staff also provided notice through the town's website, town's Facebook page, and the notice of the public meeting was circulated to the town's frequent builders and contractors, so they were aware of this. Finance Department presented the fees and charges report to council on December 9th, 2020, with the recommendation that the bylaw or this presentation be presented to council for the public meeting. So why are the permit fees increases being proposed? Where the revenues collected are not sufficient to cover the costs associated with enforcement of the regulation, the general tax levy or reserve fund supplements the difference. If revenues exceed the anticipated expenses, the funds can be transferred to a reserve account for the building. Most municipalities are striving to be cost neutral. So as you can see in the table that's here, the last couple of years, the actual budgeted expenses were higher than the projected revenues. In 2018, it was almost $280,000. 2019 was $226,000, and that was very similar to 2020. That was budgeted numbers. The actual numbers we're going to get to. So this is a chart showing the actual budget numbers, how they turned out by the end of the year. So in 2018, the revenues exceeded budget by just over $73,000. So we budgeted $530,000, revenues came in at $603,000, which was a surplus of $73,000. Even with the surplus of $73,000, there was a shortfall in the department of $134,000, which was supplemented by the general tax levy. In 2019, our revenues were actually quite a bit higher by almost $200,000 over our budgeted amount. With a $200,000 difference and $87,000 in total expenses that were not utilized throughout that year, we were actually able to put $62,300 into reserve account. So in 2020, these numbers are not finalized. It still has to be reconciled, but it gives us a really good ballpark of what's happening. We budgeted a revenue of $690,000 when our actual revenues were just over $1 million. We have a difference of $350,000 that came in, and we did not use $105,000 out of our budgeted expenses. Over $60,000 of that expenses that weren't utilized was when we hired the deputy chief building official. They were supposed to be hired in the spring, but it didn't get hired into the, oops, going the wrong way. Didn't get hired until later in the year. That saved the department almost $60,000. So as you can see in the bottom line, our annual surplus was actually $459,000 over budget, but only $232,000 went to reserves. So there was a difference there of $220,000 that would have been a deficit to the department. So the town's reserve policy, so we do actually have a reserve policy that deals with building department reserves, and it has a target balance of 1 year's budget. The target budget balance for 2021 is $821,000. If we transfer the $232,000 plus our existing reserve, that would take our total reserve for 2020 up to $538,000. So we're just about $300,000 short in our reserve fund. So why are we looking at proposing a fee increase? The building permits were formally studied in 2006 by BMA Management Consulting, where it was recommended that the fees receive an annual adjustment, such as consumer price indexing or CPI. There were a number of years after 2006 where the fees were not increased. Over the last couple of years, we've definitely seen some increases in these fees. In 2018, we saw 1.7%. 2019, we saw a CPI increase of 2.2. And then we also did, on top of that, we did some top-up increases up to 10% in a couple of our fee categories, just to bring us in line with the regional average. The proposed rate increase for this year is to bring us in line with that regional average and maintain that CPI index of 0.6%. So on top of the across the board 0.6%, there are a few additional fees that would see a higher, proposed to see a higher increase, just to bring it in line with the regional average. So the assembly occupancy is proposed to see a 1.2% increase, which results in a 2 cent per square foot increase. Care and treatment is a 1 cent increase, which is actually 0.5%. Residential is a 1 cent increase, which is 1.2%, or sorry, 0.76. The office and mercantile, our office is a 2 cent increase, which is the 1.25%. The mercantile is showing a 2.76% increase, which is 4 cents a square foot. Industrial is proposed to see a 6.73% increase, which is 7 cents a square foot. And the minimum fee for a permit is proposed to see that 0.6%, which works out to $1. Farm buildings is proposed to see a 10% increase, which equals out to 3 cents. And then the demolition per square foot is a 1 cent increase to keep us in line with the regional average, but that actually works out to 16.7% increase. Most of the other fees, as I said, will be proposed to see that 0.6% increase, with some fees not seeing any increase at all because it was either negligible or our fees were already at or exceeded the regional average. Please be reminded that these fees apply to those undertaking work that constitutes a building permit only. So this isn't a general user fee that goes across the entire municipality. It's only those that require building permits. So these proposed fee increases, this chart shows an example of our current rates versus proposed. So on a 2,300 square foot house, we see a difference here of about $18 on the actual square footage of the house. The garage and porch fees stay the same because there was no proposed increase. So sorry, yeah. And the total fee difference on a new house of 2,300 square feet works out to about $23. So annual fee increases equal to CPI are still proposed. This is to ensure that the revenues collected through the permit process continue to strive through to that cost neutral goal. The permit fees will be reviewed annually to determine if any additional fee increases are warranted. Since the building permit fees were last formally reviewed in 2006, there is a proposal for a review of the permit fees by a consultant in the 2021 budget. If approved by council, a complete review of the fees would be undertaken, with a report being presented to council with the results of that review. Next steps, there is a recommendation report on tonight's agenda for council's consideration. And depending on the outcome of that, there may be a user fee bylaw presented to council on February 22nd. And this concludes my presentation, so I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jennings. Do any members of council have any questions of the delegation? Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Jennings. Just a quick question. I know I had mentioned to you earlier that I'm always concerned with increases during COVID. But I guess my question is, if this report with the increase wasn't approved tonight, we would just have that much more of a shortfall to make up next year, I'm assuming, since the whole point of this is to become more in line with the regional average. I just want to know if I'm correct with that thinking.
Mr. Jennings.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. One of the things we benchmark or we look at is regional average. This has been discussed before council, and council has voiced the opinion that they wanted to stay at that regional average level. What we're looking at here is looking at our departmental expenses versus our revenues. And we're trying to get that to where we are that cost neutral. So the regional average is one of the benchmarks we look at, knowing that we're still at a shortfall budgeted. 2020 was an extremely busy year, and the scale and size of some of our projects, we were able to bring additional revenues in, which we didn't expect. Very thankful for them, and that definitely helps us build that reserve. But I don't know if that is the norm coming up in the next couple of years.
Okay. Thank
Any
you.
other councillors? Councillor McDermott. You have to unmute, Councillor McDermott. We're not getting the benefit of your wisdom. You have to unmute. There you go.
So I guess my two questions are, number one, the 6.7 industrial rate. How did you come to that one?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That 0.67 or the 6.7 rate increase was the regional average of the per square footage charge compared to our current charge. And I just worked that out as a percentage.
Councillor McDermott.
Because on a big industrial project, that could turn into thousands of dollars, right? Correct?
Yeah, potentially it could be, yes.
My other question is that report that's going to follow, is the idea going to be that we're going to try and make this revenue neutral at some point? Is that one of the things that the consultants will look at?
It's through you, Mr. Mayor. That would be what the consultant would look at, is to say, based on our town of Fort Erie's projected construction, that's land available, proposed things that are on the books, and our workload over the last few years, to kind of say, okay, what's our trends? From there, they would base that and then determine the fees to get to a cost neutral, looking at all the expenses that we incur. So yeah, so there would be no impact on the general tax levy.
Councillor McDermott?
No, that's good to hear, because you don't want to be having taxpayers pay for all that off, and you want to have it put to where it's supposed to be paid. So as long as we're heading toward that goal, I haven't got a problem with that, but I think that that's a noble goal to get to, for sure. And thank you for your report.
Thank you. Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Through you to Mr. Jennings. In regards to the response you've received from the builders, in general, what has the response been?
Mr. Jennings?
Through you to the councillor, I've had zero response from any of our builders or the public on this matter.
Is that unusual?
Jennings?
Through you to the councillor, no, it's not unusual.
Okay.
It's very rare that we actually have somebody have an opinion on the fee increase.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Jennings, I maybe should have circulated, but I think last Monday during the council meeting, I maybe received an email from someone who was questioning the increases, but understood that these increases really relate to those who are essentially users of the system. Are there any other councillors who have any questions? So the target of 1 year's budget for the reserve fund, is that something that how did that come into being? Is that something that you could respond to, or is that something I should ask Mr. Jansen when we get to the report?
Mr. Jansen may be better to answer that. I just recently found out about the policy myself.
Okay, I will ask him when we get there. And has there been any calculation done on what the situation would be in 2021 if there was no increase of fees across the board?
Mr. Mayor, no, I did not do that calculation.
Okay, then I will ask Mr. Jansen, and if he hasn't done the calculation by now, I'm sure he'll work on that feverishly between now and the report. Mr. Davis, I'm going to go to you in the event there's anyone in the public who has registered wishing to speak to us with respect to this public meeting.
I don't see any hands up at this point, Mayor Redekop.
Note that we have a number of attendees to the meeting.
Yep,
Some of them are individuals that relate to other delegations that we have. So I'm going to ask if there's anyone that wishes to address council, please raise your hand digitally so that Mr. Davis can see that and bring you into the meeting.
Mayor Redekop, I don't see any hands up at this point.
Okay, then I'm going to conclude this public meeting and we're going to move on with our agenda. Thank you very much, Mr. Jennings. I think you should stick around for the report though, in case there are other questions.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop.
Thank you. That takes us then to the regional councillors report. Good evening, Councillor Encina.
Good evening, Mayor Redekop and councillors. I haven't had the opportunity yet this year to wish all of you a happy and safe New Year. So I'd like to do that at this time to all of you and staff at the town.
Thank you.
I was preparing my notes for today and noted that Mr. Robinson from the region was attending, and he was going to be talking about the GO implementation strategy. I was going to talk about this, but I will leave that up to him and Mr. Fraser. I've been a big pain in the posterior of Mr. Robinson, pushing the interest of Fort Erie in his department. So to Mr. Robinson, thank you for your work and thank you for being here. Two major issues that have been taking up a lot of time at the region have been the regional budget and COVID pandemic, as the mayor alluded to. Thus far, there have been 3 budget workshops, 4 meetings regarding the finalization of the 2021 budget. As you are all aware, we're in difficult times, and adding extra burden to taxpayers is trying to be avoided. One last budget meeting is slated for this Thursday prior to our council meeting, and it's hoped that the budget will be completed by then and brought forward at that meeting on Thursday. From what I understand, and I'm really hoping for this, that the blending rate right now, we are on track for less than 3%. Adding to Mayor Redekop's comments with regard to COVID-19, at the last Public Health and Community Services meeting, a resolution was passed to create a task force to deal with COVID-19 response. We heard from Public Health Officer, and there was apparent disconnect with Niagara Health, Niagara Public Health, and the province. The task force has been formed and modeled after one that is already in place at Waterloo. It's utilizing experts from the medical professions and in the community. They have been mandated to the task force to report back to council bi-weekly on their progress that they've been having. Councillors should know that Mayor Redekop and I continue to press for information, and I'm glad to see that the website has finally been changed and modified. And I would suggest to you that that is a lot to do with what Mayor Redekop has been pushing through public health and through Dr. Hergy. And well done, Mayor Redekop. The region will be entering into a contract with Ontario Climate Consortium, a nonprofit climate science leader, in order to provide climate change modeling and projection data. This data will be shared with all partners to help inform future policy decisions that will need to be made. The project is slated to start this February, and the findings are to be brought forward near the end of the year. I am interested in this because it should have data regarding our shoreline erosion and how climate change is affecting all of us as we move forward. Garbage issues continue to persist. I believe the mayor and I just dealt with a couple as recent, even though there are new contractors. If you are having any problems, please have people contact the region or myself. And I know people have contacted the mayor. I know he has a full plate, so if you want to contact me, that's not a problem. And I'm hoping the initial break-in period will finally be over soon, so we won't have these issues. One final thing, the Alzheimer's Society on Sunday, January 31st, is celebrating their 17th anniversary of their annual walk. And due to the pandemic, it was decided that a virtual walk is going to take place. So they're asking participants to walk 10,787 steps, which is the number of people living with dementia in Niagara. I want to throw it out there. If anybody is interested, if you're out doing your exercises, you can contact alzgiving.ca Niagara if you want to support that cause. I'm hoping to do that. I'm not sure if I can make 10,000 steps, but hey, if George can do it, I can do it.
Look at it.
Thank you.
You guys are going to do this together. You know you have to social distance, right?
Absolutely. That's all, Mayor Redekop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Encina, and good work with respect to helping to put together that task force. Very much appreciated. I know that you and the Public Health Committee were pounding away at it last week. Are there any members of council that have any questions of Councillor Encina? Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Encina, great to see you. Happy New Year. You always got a smile on your face. I love seeing that. Just a quick issue I wanted to raise with regard to waste management. I received an email from a resident. I think it was back just after Christmas, regarding the recycling of fluorescent tubes. And the resident had mentioned that in order to dispose of them, they actually had to travel all the way to Welland, and that our Bridge Street landfill site actually didn't have a facility to be able to receive them. And I don't know the details. I don't know if there's logistical issues or certain things that would prevent that from happening in Fort Erie. I'm just wondering if perhaps you could take that back to the director who handles that and perhaps raise it as an issue, just to see if it would be possible to have that at the Bridge Street landfill site. It would save people an hour worth of travel going to Welland and back if they wanted to recycle those fluorescent tubes.
Through you, Mayor Redekop, to Councillor Dubanow, I will take that back. I will ask, even if there was a potential for a drop-off area, just where someone can drop off and it be taken off. Personally, I don't see an issue with that. And I will contact Director Habermill about that to see what we can arrange.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dubanow. Any other councillors? Easy night, Councillor Encina. Okay, then that takes us to presentations and delegations. And the first delegation is Matt Robinson and Scott Fraser from the region with respect to the transportation governance study and recommendations relative to public transit in Niagara. So Mr. Davis, you're going to bring them in, I presume?
Yep, they're on their way in right now.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Robinson.
Evening, Mr. Mayor.
And Mr. Fraser is going to be with us soon. There he is. Good evening, Mr. Fraser. So gentlemen, we're pleased that you're here this evening. I'm sure that members of council are anxiously awaiting your comments and the opportunity to ask some questions with respect to the governance of transit in Niagara.
So with that, I will share my screen here. Let's go with this. Share from the beginning. All good, everybody see that?
We can see, yeah, it's a little cut off, but we can see most of it. I think you can proceed.
Okay. All right, so I will say at the outset that our presentation is around 15 minutes. So I want to give council sort of that awareness. Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if that's a challenge for council in terms of its parameters on delegations. I just wanted to be upfront with that right at the outset.
So Mr. Robinson, I can ask council to pass a resolution to give you 15 minutes, but I don't want to be doing a resolution 15 minutes from now to extend the time for another 5 minutes. So if you need 15 minutes, I think council would be very much interested in hearing what you have to say. And so I will ask the councillor to move to give you a 15-minute latitude. Is that your hands up, Councillor Dubanow?
Yes.
And do I have a seconder? Councillor McDermott. All those in favor? That looks pretty unanimous to me, although I haven't got everybody on the screen. But so you've got 15 minutes, Mr. Robinson, and I'm not going to start timing you until now.
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor and council, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Matt Robinson, and I'm the director of the GO Implementation Office at Niagara Region. Tonight, council will hear about the next steps in an exciting, purposeful transition toward a consolidated transit system in Niagara. As I said, I've asked council's indulgence as I present. Tonight is really about consultation. This is council's chance to provide the project team with feedback. With me are Scott Fraser and Heather Talbot from Niagara Region, as well as our consultant teams from Optimus and Left Turn, Right Turn. I also want to recognize both Mayor Redekop and Councillor Encina, who have been very strong advocates for transit at Regional Council, as well as recognize the hard work of town staff in Kelly Walsh and Jennifer Panella J from our transit working group. So tonight we will examine where we've been and why we're here, the project's objectives, Highlights of the governance study examine the benefits of a consolidated system, and then finish with a look at next steps. When I was last here in 2017, we sought authority for the region to operate transit. Included then was also an endorsement in principle to move forward with transit consolidation. Tonight is about advancing the next chapter in that story. The LNTC, or Linking Niagara Transit Committee, was established after that unanimous triple majority process in 2017. Its mandate is to review transit region-wide, focusing on operational integration and developing a governance model. Tonight, you'll see the results of that governance study. So why integrate transit in Niagara? Well, it allows every community to better connect riders more seamlessly and allows for increased equity by breaking down social and economic barriers, making communities across Niagara connected in ways that improve our residents' social determinants of health. Integrating transit enhances our growth and economic development opportunities. Economic development professionals regularly attest to how important a region's seamless and connected transportation system is as the backbone for residents and businesses seeking new communities to call home, and as a catalyst for intensification and development growth. It's no longer a competitive advantage, it's a requirement. Employers attest to the need for a connected and seamless system that enables their businesses and employees to access skills and opportunities both to and from the GTHA. And accessibility is a key feature to a seamless system, and not just through the commingling of passengers with mobility assisted riders on conventional systems, but also accessibility and access to transit in those underserved or unserved by transit in their communities. And lastly, integrated transit supports sustainability. It contributes to a greener economy, enables a shift to greater transit use and less vehicles on the road. So why do it now? COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on transit across the world. Most systems have ridership numbers that are a small fraction of the pre-pandemic numbers. The federal government indicates 3 to 5 years for transit to recover to pre-pandemic levels. The IMT working group has been meeting weekly since the pandemic was declared. With 11 separate transit systems operating in Niagara, we had to, for the residents and for the riders we serve. We've been working toward this goal since 2017, advancing a long list of operational harmonization for a seamless transition to a single transit entity. Consolidating now allows us to maximize our resources at a time when resources are even more precious and transit is significantly reduced. Overall, it would allow us to create a maximized system that fully leverages the resources we have collectively invested to make our transit system even better. Integrating now also allows us to create a seamless, specialized, and conventional system, one that serves to create unity, equity, and seamless transit for all users, no matter their mobility needs. Transition to a larger system ensures faster, more targeted investments are made to growing communities, underserved or unserved areas, and maximization of on-demand resources, which are spreading as a very effective, viable deployment, seeing explosive growth where it's been implemented. And lastly, integrating now allows for a seamless integration with the GO network, whether integration with Presto, new direct connections to GO stations, or even expansion of GO Bus, this one's for Councillor Encina, to Fort Erie or Brock University. This is exponentially more effective under a single transit system. So with the stage set on how we got this far and why we're here tonight, let's examine the highlights of the governance study. Over the course of 2020, under the guidance of the Area CAO Working Group, the consultants undertook developing a new governance model. The governance study used a 5-step process. It started with a full review of the current state of transit in Niagara. Who has what, how they operate it, how much they invest. Did a full jurisdictional scan of peer regions from across Ontario and Edmonton, which together served as the baseline for analysis. The LNTC also wanted to see what Niagara's transit could aspire to be. What could a fully integrated transit model in Niagara deliver in terms of ridership, and what would it take to get there? This is the future state model. From there, models were identified, compared, and graded against a matrix of factors, landing on a final recommendation. With a recommended model, the study plotted a blueprint for Niagara to transition effectively each step of the way to achieve this in a 24-month period. The study concluded that the full commission model is the most effective for Niagara. bringing the right balance of autonomy and flexibility to drive growth and transit innovation. The full commission was determined to be best able to meet Niagara's changing needs and create an enhanced system that would provide transit equity to our 12 municipalities. The key benefits of the commission were its autonomy and its financial flexibility. Through a commission, the transit system could grow with an exclusive focus on transit. With a board and staff devoted to innovative and responsive transit growth, Niagara's communities will realize its full transit potential. The commission will be able to respond to trends in the industry and better adapt to pressures. Being a separate entity, it will also have better negotiating power with its ATU members. The commission also stacks up as being the most cost-efficient system. This is well documented across Ontario, with separate transit entities routinely providing a less expensive cost per trip than other transit models. So the commission, legally referred to as a municipal services board, is recommended to have a 9-member board with 5 voting members from regional council and 4 skills-based members of the public. These public members would serve at large and bring value-added industry skills to the board's decision-making. In support of the board, an advisory committee will be established. This is something familiar with the town. It would report to the commission as a way for frontline users to interface with the board and provide representation from the community on things such as the transit system's growth, focus areas, customer needs, and community interests. A 5-step plan was developed to take the process from approval through to a fully in-service environment, including the selection of the board, the consolidation of staff, assets, and services through to service launch. This process, from start through to service transfer to the new entity, is mapped out in significant detail in the transition plan, with the proposed opening day of the new commission being September 2022. So we're here in Fort Erie. How does this proposal benefit and impact the residents of your community? So first, a bit of visioning on that. What does it mean for residents in Fort Erie? Imagine a single fare gets you anywhere. Your phone serves as your transit pass and payment technology. There's one transit brand on every bus, easily numbered. Transfers to anywhere, easily. Consistent service hours across all municipalities. No more 9 p.m. in one municipality and midnight in the one next. No more limitations on service expansion as ridership grows and expands. Seamless connections and transfers to the GO network at your municipal hub. 15-minute headways across the system. Bus rapid transit routes on express corridors, connections to HSR in Hamilton, and choosing to leave your car at home to travel to and from your job in Hamilton, Oakville, or Toronto.
Excuse me, Mr. Robinson, is your presentation supposed to be moving up as you're speaking?
Yes, sir.
So it hasn't been.
I apologize.
No,
I
that's
wish I'd
quite all
done
right.
that.
Yeah, no, I wish I'd said something sooner.
Fair enough.
It may be that you're having trouble with the technology here. I don't know. Mr. Davis, can you help at all?
It seems like his PowerPoint presentation just hasn't been put to full screen, and you just need to click forward as you talk.
All right, I have been doing that, sir, and I apologize for this.
If I could just pipe in, sorry. Sometimes it helps if you unshare and share again, and it'll start moving. I've had that difficulty myself before. Oh, it's moving.
Yeah.
I don't want to use this type of method again. I apologize for this.
No, that's quite all right. And you haven't been penalized for the time that we've taken, or we've tried to get that sorted out. Because this is a very important issue, and I don't want to make light of the fact that this is very important for us.
Well, let me. This is unfortunate. I apologize.
Can you advance it by clicking on each box?
I will, and this is different than we use at regional council, so I apologize here. Okay, I will advance slides this way instead.
Right.
And go from here. So NRT On Demand was launched in 2020 and has seen explosive growth since the pandemic, or despite the pandemic. It very effectively serves underserved and unserved communities, provides access to all residents, and has 5-star driver and rider ratings, and is financially efficient. Imagine a system where our smaller urban or rural municipalities are served by on-demand transit, fueling and feeding the larger municipalities who have the densities needed for conventional systems, making getting to the big city amenities, employment, and education much more seamless and readily available. With a single Niagara system feeding riders to 4 future rail stations, providing hourly GO train service to and from the GTHA, GO bus connection points are also possible in Fort Erie and at Brock University. Enhanced service is one of the key benefits, and I refer to this as transit equity. Riders want consistency, reliability, and connectivity. Elected officials want equitable access that is affordable in every municipality. These can be achieved when we pool our resources for the benefit of our residents. To deliver on all of these benefits requires a financial strategy. This approach has been developed in consultation with CAOs and our area treasurers. The financial strategy supports and makes possible the consolidation of the transit system overall, bringing about the benefits we've mentioned. It includes funding for near-term transit service expansion and enhancement, specifically for our smaller municipalities who see improvements faster. It also allows all municipalities to leverage the investments that have been made across the region, avoiding duplication and ultimately leading to savings. Our provincial gas tax consolidation could allow economies of scale that cannot be realized in smaller systems. So simply put, the financial model will see the upload to a single regional levy for transit. Municipal levies will no longer pay for transit. The upload duration is varied by municipality. Smaller municipalities go more quickly, larger ones go over 5 years. And existing service levels will be maintained for at least 5 years. The levy starts with funding transition costs via the regional levy. It ramps up as municipal transit budgets are transferred to the region. Throughout the upload, funding is being provided for expansion via the regional levy or reinvestment to the system from the uploads. With regard to assets, the CAO working group has endorsed the Cummings principle to address the future transfer of assets from area municipalities and the region to the new commission. Under this scenario, capital assets will be transferred to the new commission. By utilizing the Cummings principle, asset transfers occur fairly, equitably, and transparently. It has also been established through judicial precedent over 40 years and has guided every other transit consolidation over that period. And lastly, the Cummings principle is well aligned to Niagara's established guiding principles of fairness, which respects the existing investment made by communities. Under the single regional levy, the region will fund 100% of the new commission by 2027. Specifically for Fort Erie, the financial model for the single regional levy is based on the municipal regional split prior to the recent approval from Fort Erie Council to move to an on-demand system. With the recent move to the on-demand approach, the recommended financial model will need to be adjusted to reflect the new level of transit investment in Fort Erie. It is likely under the updated model, the transition of the Fort Erie municipal levy may occur in 2024 instead. As the new commission is established and Niagara's transit system and ridership grows, there are a number of ways to mitigate future funding pressures and enable tax levy offsets. These include support from our provincial and federal partners through capital, operating, innovation, or expansion programs, population and assessment growth, and new business development, including associated future DCs. So we've heard the benefits of integrating transit, how it can be achieved, what we can achieve together, what the commission looks like, how long it will take, and how the community benefits. So what's next? In summary, the full commission has been found best suited for Niagara, funded through a single regional levy over 5 years, providing protection for existing service hours, assets, and people. Tonight, your clerk has prepared a package with a motion for council to consider. This motion is non-binding, intended to get agreement or support in principle for the consolidation and its principles. Tonight, again, is about consultation. We welcome and encourage your feedback. We're listening and we're hopeful we can provide and accommodate all of your feedback to make the model one that all of Niagara can be proud to embrace. This roadshow period we are in will have the project team doing these presentations across all 13 councils through the end of February. We will take in all of the feedback received, identify, theme, incorporate, and address what we've heard, just like an environmental assessment, and reflect it in the final report brought back for final vote. Based on these revisions, the triple majority process will commence formally in the summer of this year. If the process and timeline progress as planned, by September 2022, Niagara would have a new single transit commission in place. With that, I thank you, Council, for your indulgence and your attention. We are passionate about this and hope to hear and address any questions you might have, take away any solutions you may suggest, and welcome the chance to hear your insights. Thank you very much.
That was bang on timing, Mr. Robinson. I've got to say I'm impressed by your sense of timing. You did make reference to the fact that our clerk has put on our agenda a resolution with respect to this. I don't think that's true. Maybe you could unshare your screen and then I can see the clerk. Madam Clerk. Yeah,
That
go ahead.
resolution will come through on February 22nd. It's my understanding that staff will be bringing a report to council following this meeting. So that's
Right. So the, yeah, this is under correspondence. So rather than just receive it, should we be referring it to staff when we get to that point?
Staff was going to be doing that in any event.
Regardless? Okay.
Yeah.
As long as it's clear then. So that'll be, we'll be getting a response back to the region by the timeline, Mr. Robinson. Do any members of council have any questions of Mr. Robinson? Councillor Noyes.
Mayor Redekop, through you to the speaker. Thank you for your presentation. Oh, still says I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Through you, Mayor, to the presenter. You mentioned, I think the last slide, not the last slide, but the last thing you mentioned was that if everything goes smoothly and all these meetings and you get the triple majority, that it would be September 2022 that you're looking at this to, let's say, to be implemented. But I thought earlier you had said for Fort Erie, because we had started the on-demand, or we're looking at starting the on-demand, that for a full rollout for Fort Erie wouldn't be until 2024. Did I misunderstand something?
Mr. Robinson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So the idea is that a threshold of approximately $500,000 is set per year for the upload. Year one of operations is slated for September 2022. So in theory, there's only a quarter worth of time in 2022. So that would be the first year in which the regional levy would start to upload any municipality who has an existing transit levy less than or equal to $500,000. Based on Fort Erie's existing transit levy, the town's transit levy, which could grow to 1.3 million based on the previous report that I saw. In any event, it's upwards of $800,000 at the current time, which at that rate would take at a $500,000 increment at least 2, if not 3 years to then fully upload at those $500,000 per year increments. So though the transit agency will be up and operating, Fort Erie continues to contribute and wind down its transit levy on the local levy by $500,000 each year until it is exhausted.
So Noyes, I think if you look at table 2 of the report, it kind of outlines how this is going to take place municipality by municipality.
Well, thank you. That does clear it up for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Robinson. It was a great presentation. It was very informative, but I did do a little bit of the math, and so I'm not understanding a couple of things. I've always been a big proponent of regional transit because it would give us more to offer our own residents. But coming out of that, Some of the problems that we encountered in the past with understanding how regional transit would work would be, I guess, fair transportation schedules in the Fort Erie market throughout Fort Erie. And I know that you touched on that a bit, but you were saying that there would be 15-minute headways. Would that be immediate at the get-go, or would that be slowly transitioned in throughout the years as we discover the ridership has increased?
Mr. Robinson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. And it's a great question, because what we're trying to do is appropriately balance commitments now with binding a new organization with a number or a laundry list of promises that we've made through these delegations to a number of communities. But what I can say on principle is, and something that I think we've been given direction to study going forward, is I talked about transit equity. And that really is bringing about a level of consistency across all of the municipalities. That includes access to transit, the similar operating hours, similar days of the week in which they operate. And the bottom line is, in order to hit those what we call service standards, we want to make sure that that level of service exists across the board. So when we talk about consistent levels of transit for 5 years, it really does relate primarily to the larger municipalities who have significant amounts of and large volumes of either ridership or service hours. In smaller or medium-sized communities, we want to make sure that we bring all of those communities up to at least an equitable access to transit. So I know in the on-demand scenario that Fort Erie is moving towards, that's going to allow for you to create better access to all of your residents by moving to that model. The reality is we see reinvestment into those types of communities like Fort Erie, where maybe the system that you upload doesn't operate 7 days a week. Maybe it doesn't operate with an 18-hour operating window. Those are the kind of consistencies that we see immediately coming out of the new transfer and the new entity, is taking the resources that the regional levy provides and bringing that equity across all of the existing systems. So the smaller municipalities are going to see an increase in their transit systems, but we're providing some surety to the larger municipalities that we're not going to do that at the expense of lowering theirs. So long answer to get to, we see investments in small and medium-sized municipalities to bring about that consistency in the immediate term when the commission is established.
Yeah.
Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Your Worship. And that's a bit of my concern, is that we would have to, we would really have to remain where we are in terms of what we're offering our community, because we don't A, have the revenue, and B, have the ridership. But I think if you're looking at expanding that transit system and doing something like Toronto, the GTA area, and having that opportunity to have a 15-minute headway to pick up a transit, then it just goes to say that there will be more access to people, and people will then start to go towards that transit system.
Absolutely.
And when you mentioned, through you to Your Worship, the $127 million that it's going to take to, is that to run the entire program regionally?
Mr. Robinson?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I hope I'm going to call on Heather Talbot, who I believe the clerk may need to allow into the room. I believe the 127 million is referencing prior or previous capital, the total of previous capital investment. But I would like Ms. Talbot to confirm that for you, Councillor, so that you have accuracy in that response.
Thank you.
Hi, through you, Mr. Mayor. The 127 million that Matt was referring to is the previous capital investment of the facilities and the buses that are existing in the primarily the large 3 municipalities that purchase capital. For Fort Erie, I think you have a small amount of capital, but primarily through your contracts, they provide the capital. So the 127 million is actually the capital investment that's already been incurred, but you'd become a part owner. It would become a regional asset versus individual assets at St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, and Welland.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that just to me then means that since you already have the capital asset of $127 million and it's going to be shared throughout the other smaller municipalities, smaller and medium municipalities, our 1.3 million, I think it is, or 1.6 million, I can't remember what our fee structure is on an annual basis, or our budget is on an annual basis, that would go towards the region. Would there be an increased cost as a direct result?
So there's not an indirect, there's not a direct cost increase to a municipal levy, but there's $27 million in local transit costs right now at the local level. There are about 14 million in Niagara regional transit costs. There's 2.7 million in transition costs, which when you asked earlier about expansion in the rural communities and increasing links, those transition costs are one time only. And then it's proposed that 2.7 would actually be reinvested into expanding rural connections towards the urban centers. So that would be a reinvestment in transit that would go towards the other communities outside of St. Catharines, Welland, and Niagara Falls. The capital costs, there are not capital costs except for the reserves or transfer to reserves for bus replacements. But the provincial gas tax, which is currently utilized within your operating budget, would actually be moved on a regional level towards capital replacement. And within the entire strategy, you would also, right now, gas tax takes up or will accommodate about 65% of bus replacements. So embedded within our strategy would also be a transfer to reserve that would allow those bus replacements to exist throughout the future.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to wait for the report when the staff comes out with it, Your Worship. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Any other councillors? Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. On the board structure, you said something, Matt, you said something about there would be a board and an advisory committee. And the board, how is that? What's the composition of that again?
Mr. Robinson.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to slide number 11, that's 5 voting members of elected officials. So that's 1 Welland, 1 St. Catharines, 1 Niagara Falls, and 2 from the remaining municipalities on a rotating basis. And then 4 at-large public members on a skills-based membership. So that 9 members constitutes the board with an advisory committee supporting or reporting into that board.
So what you're saying then is you're going to have consistently 4 members from certain municipalities, and then 2 members are going to be floating from the remaining municipalities. Are you going to rotate that? So every once in a while, Fort Erie has an actual regional councillor from Fort Erie that sits on the board?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's the intention, Councillor, is that the remaining municipalities with that rotating seat establish in the terms of reference of the new board an actual rotation of when each municipality will assume that seat.
Yeah, but you're having a definite. What I'm saying is Niagara Falls is always going to have a representative. and St. Catharines is always going to have a representative. Are they going to be one of the two from that make up the board, the rotating? Because to me, it doesn't seem a fair system to have 4 or 5 from the same municipality all the time. And then the remaining municipalities have to find 2 of them to represent. We're not going to get proper representation. So that would be a concern of mine. I'll bring that up. And what about the advisory committee? What's the composition of the advisory committee?
Mr. Robinson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the advisory committee has 12 Niagara residents, 1 per municipality, appointed by local councils.
Yep.
Two members of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, 2 members from, or 1 each from Brock University and Niagara College student unions, 1 from the Chamber of Commerce, and the transit manager or transit general manager.
Okay, thank you. And getting back to the existing services, you said in your presentation that you would maintain your existing services for at least 5 years. Now, are you saying that after 5 years, your services might diminish depending on your municipality?
Based on, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I think the intention of putting that clause or that principle in place, councillor, is to ensure that as I said, we envision that the smaller and medium-sized municipalities, of which Fort Erie is one for the consideration of the governance study, that transit services and transit provision would increase in those first 5 years. It's only in those larger municipalities, St. Catharines, Well, and Niagara Falls, who with a significant amount of existing transit service are going to try to ensure that there's a floor that exists from which their existing transit service cannot go any lower. The real question going forward is that future state report has an enormous amount of transit expansion slated for Niagara, with a lot of latent demand given an increase in that consolidation. And as a result of that, we've been clear as a project team, this exercise in transit consolidation is not about financial efficiency or financial reductions. Transit services will grow across Niagara in every municipality. This is about ensuring that in those first few years, that the larger municipalities at least maintain a status quo of which there is no less service than they have heading into the existing or the new transit entity.
Yeah, but my question is, can we be assured of that as well? I know what you're saying, that, the idea is to expand, but are we guaranteed that our services will stay the same, will not diminish?
Mr. Robinson?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think as part of your feedback as a town council, when Mr. Walsh brings forward his report in February, I think, councillor, those are the types of feedback that we need to take back as a project team. So if that's important to council, then that should comprise of part of the feedback, is to ensure that the town of Fort Erie asserts that as one of their, I won't say conditions, but a piece of feedback to the project team that 5 years should be extended out to a number of municipalities, including the town of Fort Erie.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other councillors? Mr. Robinson, I've just got a few questions, and listening to your presentation, which is very good, and you're always very concise. The comment about this isn't about financial efficiency. I'm not going to try to speculate on what you actually meant to say, because we're all concerned about financial efficiency. But and that gets me really to the nub of this whole issue, which is the need for a triple majority to be achieved in order for this initiative to move forward. And the biggest obstacle at committee, as you're aware, has to do with the one regional levy, which results in some municipalities paying significantly more, some municipalities paying significantly less. And while I know that there's the explanation that those larger municipalities are transferring capital assets, the reality is that those capital assets will continue to be used in those municipalities, will they not?
In response to your question, Mr. Mayor, again, that comes down to that window of time, that 5 years. So what we don't want to do is bind a new entity that a status quo scenario remains or prevails for 10 years into the future. I think what we're trying to ensure is that for the first 5 years, people, assets, and service levels remain at least at their existing levels coming into the new consolidation. But after those 5 years, I think those are discussions where under a new service plan and a system network rethink from a new commission, they're going to look at where best to deploy new densities, new service levels, all of those types of things that enable the growth of the system. So there's a very real possibility that in year 6 or year 7, that if Fort Erie warrants the larger volumes that a conventional system needs to move, those assets and rolling stock from the consolidated entity could very well be redeployed to serve other municipalities where the transit need exists.
Well, I don't want to be argumentative, but I'd be suspecting that it's more likely that the system would have to buy new rolling stock in order to meet increased demand elsewhere, which really makes the figures in table 3 okay, but they're static. They indicate a status quo with respect to the overall capacity of the system, because it's $27,351,000 in 2021, $51,000 in 2029, so that there won't be a change in capacity. There'll be a change in how the costs are paid. At least that's what it looks like. And yet you've spoken this evening about expansion of service in response to questions here. And so any expansion in service is going to have to be paid for somewhere. My question is, we have the list of what municipalities are paying now for their current transit systems, and 2 of which pay nothing. How much is the region contributing currently to the regional transportation system?
Ms. Talbot, I'll let you respond to the mayor.
To you, Mayor. The current regional budget, net transit budget, is about $14 million. So those are primarily connecting the major cities and the rural communities. And then the 2.7 million in one-time transition costs, those would be reinvested into further expanding the connections of the rural communities.
And if I might, the $14 million relates solely to intermunicipal transportation, because that's the region's mandate currently.
That's correct, yes.
And that's the area that would be of most interest to most of the municipalities that are going to be looking to get from the outer ring of communities into GO, into university, into the hospital system, et cetera. So that $14 million is currently being contributed to by the municipalities on the regional levy basis. And in Fort Erie's case, it's around, I think, 7%. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. One thing I'd actually like to add on top of that, however, because the conventional system, which primarily links, like you said, the universities and those larger movements of people, within the full upload of the 27 million plus the 2 million within the regional budget of specialized transit, the full transit budget will also contain about $5 million in specialized transit funding. And that is an area where the efficiencies will actually allow all communities to benefit from that movement of people towards the new hospitals and towards the amenities that they need. So I think while the conventional may be still moving primarily, the NRT part will be moving the students, the specialized actually will reach all the communities in a more cost-effective way.
So in a nutshell, if I or any member of council were asked by a member of the public, looking at this report, looking at table 3, and asking why we would agree to go from $826,000 a year to $1.7 million or double, what would I say? What would we say to them? What would we say to the resident? That this is in your interest as a resident of Fort Erie, not the aspirational aspects of the presentation. What would we say so that they understand why we would be doubling our expenditure?
Do you want me to answer that, Matt?
Keep going, Heather.
Well, I think when we dissect services, we lose focus of the larger goal. And if we look at Fort Erie, and we know that Gilmore Lodge is being redeveloped, and you spoke of that earlier tonight, we know that that's a $73 million project that's contained within Fort Erie, with I think it's a doubling of beds. And then that movement of those, the people that are living there will actually benefit from the transit upload as well, because of that 72 million, really, you know, the regional taxpayer across the Niagara region is paying for all but 7% of that 72 million. So I think the trade-off or the movement of like all services, when you're looking at them aggregated, it's the collective benefit to the Niagara region as a whole.
All right, so you've basically used sleight of hand to explain why we should approve this methodology for financing it by looking at other regional resources, and that opens up a whole other can, which we can discuss at some other time. Thank you very much, though, for your presentation, and I look forward to receiving the staff report with respect to this and having further discussions on this as this moves forward. This is a terribly important initiative for sure, and I'll be fascinated to hear the arguments advanced as to why some of these other municipalities should be jumping on board here, because some of them have financial impacts that are significantly greater than Fort Erie's change. Anyways, thanks very much, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Fraser, and Ms. Talbot. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
That then takes us to our next delegation. Once we get the decks cleared here, Mr. Davis, you can bring in Catherine Mindorf, FACA, and Barb Hopkins, who have been, I'm sure, patiently waiting.
Ms. Mindorf is coming in right now.
Hello.
Good evening, Ms.
Good
Mindorf.
evening.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. A very interesting conversation beforehand. Exciting. If you've lived in the community as long as I have, it's very exciting news.
Well, I've lived in the community longer than you have, Catherine.
You have?
I'm excited as well.
Yes, it's all
Anyways,
good.
you're here and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Kelly Davis is going to help me with the PowerPoint so we don't get slugged out there.
Okay.
And you'd be pleased to know I will keep it to 10 minutes.
Perfect.
Thank you. So, Your Worship and Councillors, today we're talking about the age-friendly communities, and you may or may not be familiar with it. We did earlier in the year leave a package with you so that you might familiarize yourself with it. But could you go to the next slide? Strong Fort Erie Neighborhoods is the organization within which age-friendly communities emerged out of in Fort Erie. So Strong Fort Erie Neighborhoods is a network of people and organizations who have been working together in Fort Erie since January 2019 to address barriers to prosperity in some of our neighborhoods, to address poverty. Next step, please. Strong Fort Erie Neighborhoods is based on the highly successful Toronto Strong Neighborhood Strategy and includes people who live and work in our neighborhoods. It's not imposed on people. And the Toronto, you would have heard about this strategy, say the revitalization, re-strengthening of Regent Street or Flemington Park or any of those neighborhoods we constantly hear about in Toronto. So it's the same theory and practice and recipe. Next slide, please. So within the Strong Fort Erie neighborhoods that we are doing, there are 5 working groups or 5 areas of focus, which were determined by people who live in the communities that we were in, the neighborhoods when we had neighborhood conversations and gatherings just before COVID. So there are 5 of them that we're working on. One is children's health and well-being. The second is healthy youth. The third is access to healthy food. The fourth is age-friendly community for all. And the fifth is investing in people in our community. And tonight I want to talk about the age-friendly community for all. So next one, please, Kelly. According to the 2016 census, and it'll be dramatically different in 2018 because of all the migration in of older retiring people into some neighborhoods in our community. In Fort Erie, 41.5% of adults are over 55. And in Fort Erie, 23.74% of adults are 65 or older. That's a significant number. It's very high. And currently in Fort Erie, there are actually 19 organizations, social organizations, to which older adults belong, that they do things for seniors. And 13 of them so far have been engaged in building age-friendly Fort Erie. In the In Communities document, which you're familiar with, the 211 Niagara historically, the database says that there are 83 organizations, both locally and regionally, that serve older adults in Fort Erie. We'll just leave that at there, but that's a big number. Next slide. So the age-friendly working group, its mission statement is the objective of the Fort Erie Age-Friendly Initiative is that all people who live in Fort Erie, regardless of age, ability, need, or capacity, are able to engage fully in community life. Kind of parallels the Accessibility Committee's mission statement in a way, in its intent. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to be age-friendly? First of all, the idea of age-friendly communities comes out of work with the WHO, and there are age-friendly communities all over the world, and in Niagara and in Ontario and Canada. So what does it mean to be age-friendly? An age-friendly community allows people of all ages to participate in activities that keep the community healthy and encourages economic stability. And it's a place where older people, and in fact anyone, can easily stay connected with others and remain independent. So next slide, please. So we've been working since December 2019, all through 2020, even though there has been COVID. And we've come up with 5 objectives that have emerged from the community. They're not imposed. They were words coming out of older adults, out of them in their when we asked them about what they wanted to focus on as older adults and strengthening our community. So the first one, of course, is what I'm coming to talk to you tonight about. The first is to establish an age-friendly Fort Erie so that we can then go on to become a regional member of the Niagara Age-Friendly Network. And the reason we want to do that, there are many, many reasons, but the main ones I look at are connects us to resources. It gives us some credibility in influencing policy and decision-making at our local level with you. And it gives you information with which you can make decisions and policy. And also it really, really strengthens any grant applications that we make, which is important. We need money to do our work. So we already have right now a grant application into the province. based on an age-friendly working group as opposed to age-friendly Fort Erie. The second one is to connect with each group in Fort Erie that serves older adults. Remember, I said there were 19, and create a network for communicating and supporting each other's goals. Prior to us gathering last a year ago, December, people often did their own thing and didn't know what each other was doing, and oftentimes we were applying for the same grants and the same supports throughout the community. So in this way, we're looking at communicating and supporting each other's goals. But what's more important, and what we've learned from the pandemic, which we didn't put in this slide, is that we have, through our work, identified people who are very much isolated and who are very vulnerable, even from a point of view of from poverty, and they're older adults. And the pandemic has really shown how isolated they are. And the other fact is that with the pandemic, many of us who are older adults who volunteered could no longer volunteer. So being connected through a network will allow us to reactivate that volunteerism, which is really important. All of this work has been done by volunteers. The third thing is to master information, or to begin to understand the whole concept of care for the caregivers. This was brought out a lot in our conversations for the purpose of engaging caregivers in all aspects of Fort Erie community life. And it means that you'll know this, it means that if you are caring for someone who has dementia or other disabilities, never has a hard time getting away from home, and that's not healthy. And so the positive is one would be healthier with a break in caring for one's loved ones. So the next one is to establish or connect to a peer navigation service for health and social services for older adults living in Fort Erie. And the primary motivator for that was because increasingly more and more services are provided using technology, and it's very difficult it's challenging for people to get the right service or to get a service by typing in a space on a computer, this is what I need. The absence of being able to speak to a real person on a peer basis, and as they go to navigate the health systems. Cancer therapy is a very good example, although Canadian Cancer Society does a great job, and a lot of the dementia work is hard to navigate through. Who's doing what and who should I contact? And then the last one is to investigate the emergence of cyber seniors. We've already connected to them, and its potential benefit to older adults living in Fort Erie. And the thinking of that is to those people, those older adults who are unfamiliar with technology and its qualities of connecting people is prominent. And when you bring in cyber seniors, there's evidence in the community. There's evidence that it really does engage people. I'm thinking of my mom. She had her 93rd birthday yesterday, and she connected to Zoom, and she knows how to do it. And she uses what's the other thing? WhatsApp all the time, which is not such a hot idea. But anyway, and then she and so she had 49 people wishing her 93rd birthday. And so she certainly wasn't isolated. That's an extreme example, but I'm just using it as a way to explain how we might connect up with people who are isolated. So those are the 5 objectives that we are working on, and that's what went into the grant application just before Christmas. The next one, please. So the question, or the ask, is 3-part actually. I only have 2 here. Oh no, this is the town of Fort Erie has a strategic plan priority 1, which you're very familiar with, and it has optimizing health, housing, and social well-being through service access and healthy lifestyle. So I've just really illustrated what we've been working on in the last year. Fits right into our priority 1 and is complementary to the work that is being done by the committee in the town, in the administration. What we've been working on also, if you go to the next slide, please, is the 8 domains of the WHO, the World Health Organization, components of an age-friendly community. And you can see that probably 6 of the 8 are encapsulated in our 5 objectives. So we're all ready to become an age-friendly Fort Erie. We've already begun the work and we're already functioning as it is. Next one, please. So very briefly, I wanted to just show you this, this model. And this is what we use for each of the 5 working groups. But let's just talk about the age-friendly working group. How we work is, the main thing to get across is that absolutely never is there an intent to reproduce any services already existing or to push back on any services that are already here. It really is about connecting. It's about connecting for the benefit of all the because of all the resources in Niagara, and shining the lens on Fort Erie, and which is our chronic or constant effort. Anyway, so what you have is you have an age-friendly working group, and in the middle, they're going in the middle, and their end point is to build an age-friendly Fort Erie action plan. And on the side, on the left-hand side, the information that we use, it's based on evidence. So it's the expert opinion of older adults. It's an inventory of all the efforts being done for older adults in the community and with people and organizations. And it's that network map I told you about, connecting the 19 organizations together.
Ms. Mindorf, excuse me, but you're a little bit over time now, and I know you're almost at the end of your presentation.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I thought I had it to 10 minutes. All right. Then the last thing on the other side, which is really important, is the best practice of the 83 organizations, inviting them to come to the table to work with us. So that's the main way we work. And then the next slide. So the 3 asks are, the first one is that Fort Erie become an age-friendly community, and the second one is that we join the age-friendly network in Niagara. And the third is that we join the WHO age-friendly, which really just a letter from the mayor and council. There's no money involved in it. And that's my request, if the council would respond back to that request. That's the end of it. Any questions?
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Mindorf. Any members of council have any questions? Great. We all had the presentation in advance and we were able to circulate it. So we appreciate this, and this will be something that we'll take under consideration. Thank you very much. Thank you. That then takes us to the final presentation, and that's by Michael Barker of Shift Landscape Architecture in connection with the Spears Park Master Plan.
Is coming in right now.
Good evening, Mr. Barker.
Good evening. I will share. I'm hoping you all can see that.
I can.
Good. Okay. So if we're good, we're ready.
Proceed.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. My name is Mike Barker, and my office, Shift Landscape Architecture, has been working with the town for over the last 8 months or so, developing concept ideas for Spears Park. So tonight we'll review the final concept and the work that has led up to this point. We started working on the project in April of 2020, so April last year. We first developed some high-level preliminary concepts, which I reviewed with town staff, and then we shared with the immediate community for some feedback. We also met with 10 students from Garrison Road Public School. Then from there, we made refinements and developed 2 concepts for a virtual open house. And then following the open house, we met with Fort Erie Accessibility Committee. And then based on that feedback, refined a final concept. So here's our location, if you're not familiar, but at the back end of Garrison Road Public School play yard, obviously a separate property, located here at the corner of Kirby and Meadowwood Street, Garrison Road here on the bottom end, and Spears over on the right-hand side. Here is the site, this green rectangle where my cursor is, within the secondary plan. So you see surrounded by low density single family housing. The other thing I would point out is that the secondary plan suggests that in the future, Meadowwood may continue on through. And if you can imagine this developing, then that would make sense that road pushes through. So to start the project, we undertook an inventory on site and then followed that up with an analysis of existing conditions. The site is an empty lot right now that would have been rough graded as part of the development of the subdivision. But other than that, there was not much on site. So we looked at the surrounding context, the residential community, the school, and the planning documents that exist. No vegetation on site right now. It is just a turf grass lot. There is a swale up here at the at this top end of the park, which is actually the west side, that was included as part of the rough grading. So following that, the next thing we did was develop multiple high-level concepts for the park. So these types of schematic plans, which offer some programmatic possibilities and start to suggest some relationships between elements. And these concepts allowed us to bring something forward to the immediate neighborhood and help them see some of the possibilities and understand what might go in a neighborhood park, basically a conversation starter and the start of our public engagement work. So this is our first phase of public engagement, in which we brought the concepts to the immediate, those three concepts you just saw, to the immediate neighborhood for review and comment. And then we held an engagement session with students from Garrison Road Public School, as well as reached out to the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee. So we posted the concepts for 3 weeks and we had 17 responses. Based on that, the community wanted to see a gathering space, including a shade structure. Standard type of play equipment. So we asked in the set of questions that we provided, standard or a more natural based play equipment, and the community thought standard or traditional play equipment was more appropriate. And then they wanted to see a small sports court area. So you could imagine a sort of half court basketball or a hoop and a ball wall, that sort of thing. Following that, as I mentioned, we undertook some student engagement with 10 students from Garrison Road, along with their principal. This, of course, had to be done virtually, but I think it worked out quite well. We developed this coloring page that you see here on the right-hand side. So the site created into a bit of a fun and interactive sort of element. And we asked the kids prior to the meeting if they could design the space. We then took them through a presentation to gauge their opinions of certain elements and certain things that you could imagine in a neighborhood park, and then had their feedback. And then they had the opportunity to talk about their design ideas. And I think it was something fun for them to do, especially given the COVID situation. And we also got some great information from them. So here you see a couple of the student drawings along the top here, and then at the bottom, a brother and sister that had the opportunity to participate and provide some great ideas. So based on the information gathered through the first round of outreach engagement, we developed the two concepts that you see here. So generally similar programmatic elements. However, the one on the left here, we did show what we're referring to as an alternate play or nature play, because that did come up from the students. And then the one on the right has more of the sports theme or the active theme elements, the sports court and the ball wall. Generally similar programmatic elements. We're somewhat limited in a park like this just due to space and budget. So not drastically different kinds of ideas, but try to work with the form a little bit and then introduce some different ideas for feedback. So we developed those concepts and then they were posted online prior to us having an online open house. And then following that open house, we met with FIAC, or the Fort Erie Advisory Committee. So we had the virtual open house at the end of July. What we did was post a pre-recorded presentation 2 weeks before to allow people to see the ideas and interact with them on their own time a little bit. Then during the open house, we invited people to join us. So we had two groups that engaged with Signe Hansen and myself. 31 distinct views during the open house, so meaning 31 separate computers or people at a computer viewed the open house, and 71 views of the online presentation. And then people also had the opportunity to reply or respond to that presentation with a comment sheet. So of the two groups that engaged with us, one family was very positive and just generally very excited for the project and wanted to convey that to us. And then a second family raised some concerns. One here, potential for wildlife. So I guess they've seen some coyotes in the area, which makes sense given the woodlot adjacent to the park. Concerned about a lack of garbage collection in the park, in this future park. And then concern about trespassing potentially from park users onto private properties. So after that, we also met with the accessibility committee, and they were generally in support of the concepts and wanted to suggest that we ensure any designs are AODA compliant and that we try to get lighting within that shade structure if that is something that we were going to have, just so there's some eyes on it that night by passersby, just for a level of safety. So based on our outreach and engagement, this is the final concept that we developed, and I think it's probably pretty clear to you, but I'll just walk you through it briefly here. We come in off of Meadowood Street, and then we have this gathering space with a shade structure that looks out over the play area and out over this lawn space. There is a sports court type of environment here with a basketball hoop, and then some of these painted games, so you could imagine Foursquare or hopscotch, and we'll, through detailed design, refine exactly what those could be. You see seating around the perimeter of the play area, so 3 separate seating areas. And then up in this end, we're suggesting a more naturalized edge, so we make a transition from that woodlot that is up here to the west. And then within that space, we introduce some armor stone seating. So there's a little bit of a somewhat secluded, obviously, given the size of the site, we can't remove people too far from the activity, but we get a bit of a different environment. And then the last thing I'll point out are these vegetated edges. So a bit of separation from this residential adjacency here. And then in the future, if there was any other residential, we have these vegetated buffers just to contain the park a little bit. And here's our cost estimate. We had a $300,000 budget, and that's what we are at. We've massaged things over the last, through the sort of final design of the concept to get us to that point. Nothing really unusual. The single largest element is the playground, which isn't surprising, and then the shade structure and just the overall paving. Other than that, it's just the individual pieces. So with that, I'll finish up with just our next steps here and then be happy to entertain any questions that you have. Our hope is to start contract documents immediately so that we can get this to tender. I think it benefits us to get it out as soon as possible before contractors' schedules fill up for the year. We anticipate about a 4-week tender period with the work that the town has to do up front, and then probably 2 weeks out to tender with contracts, and then aim for construction to start up as soon as the season opens, probably in May. So with that, that finishes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I believe Signy's here as well, if there's any other questions that I can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barker. Certainly a really broad consultative approach to this, and obviously that makes it more likely that we're going to have in the park the things that the neighbors want. Are there any members of council that have any questions of Mr. Barker? And you'll have to give me a, okay. So I don't see any hands up. Is that correct? Okay, then I guess, Mr. Barker, you've done an excellent job. The report is very thorough, and you've really touched on items that are in the park, and this, the parks have been a big interest of this particular council, so I'm sure that's why you're not getting any questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, we can get into the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone wishes to have removed from the consent agenda? If not, Councillor Lubberts, you have the resolution for council to approve the consent agenda.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McDermott that council approves the consent agenda items as recommended.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Madam Clerk, with respect to the correspondence from the City of St. Catharines, which is item 9.2B, sorry, 10.2B, that is just to receive. Was there any reason why we wouldn't have considered supporting that you're aware of?
No, I'm not aware of anything, Your Worship, so you could take it out and move to receive and support.
Okay, I'll leave that to any member of council that might be interested in doing that. If not, then Councillor Noyes. Still on mute. What about your semaphore skills?
I would make that motion to add support to that correspondence.
Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor McDermott? Are there any questions or comments with respect to that amendment to item 10.2B? If not, all those in favor? I don't see any opposed, so that's carried. Any other questions or comments with respect to any of the items in the consent agenda? If not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. And I'm sorry, Councillor Lubberts, who is the seconder on your motion?
Councillor McDermott.
Okay. So then that takes us to reports. The first report is the report with respect to Spears Park. And Councillor Zanko, you have that resolution.
Yes, thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Noyes, that PDS 06-2021 Spears Park Master Plan, the council receives and approves the Spears Park Master Plan to guide development of the park in 2021.
Are there any questions or comments with respect to that report or the recommendations contained in it? If not, all those in favor of the resolution? None opposed, that is carried. And I note that Councillor Dubanow has a conflict. So the next resolution to get you back into the game, Councillor Dubanow, is yours. And that relates to the property on Maple Avenue.
Yes, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Noyes, that council authorizes and approves the sale of 0 Maple Avenue, lot 583, plan 475 Birdie, Fort Erie, being all of pin 64196-0015 LT as a limited marketability parcel to the applicant George Bergman for the amount of $7,900 plus HST, subject to the land legally merging in title with the applicant's abutting property, and further that council directs that a bylaw be submitted to council to authorize the entry into an agreement of purchase and sale.
Are there any questions or comments with respect to that report or the recommendations? If not, then I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That then takes us to the short-term rental accommodations recommendation report. Councillor Butler, this is your resolution.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McDermott. Your Worship, how would you like me to handle this?
Well, let's ask the clerk how she would like. Since you have the resolution, one would think that it may be that you get to fill in the blanks first, but Madam Clerk, how would you like us to deal with this? Do you want us to deal with these separately and have?
Yes,
have,
I anticipated. Yes, I anticipated that it would be dealt with separately and you would deal with each one at a time.
Okay, so we're going to put the report on the floor to be dealt so that each item can be dealt with separately. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so Councillor Butler, does that help you? So you're not going to be filling in the blanks, but you're going to be putting the report on the floor.
Okay, and then I will commence with the first that, and then there will be a vote. Is that how that will work?
I think we're going to put this on the floor.
For discussion.
Yep, and it's on the floor right now. You've moved it. Councillor McDermott has seconded it, so it's technically on the floor now. So we'll look to, and I see Madam Clerk, you have your hand up. So we would look to someone to fill in option number for the first resolution.
Yes, I'm thinking that we would have Councillor Butler put it on the floor, seconded by Councillor McDermott. And then we would have somebody, she would ask that the recommendations be dealt with separately. And
Okay.
then would have someone move the first one, filling in the blank, and we would go through and vote on each one.
Okay, so
Kind of complicated, but
we can do that. We can deal with these separately. I don't think we need a motion for that. Councillor
No.
Butler, would you like to deal with these separately?
Sure, I will deal with these separately then.
Okay.
First-
And since you've moved it, I'm going to give you the first crack at filling in the first option if you wish.
Oh,
You don't have to. I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
yeah, sure. All right, so I'm just going to bring it up to that portion where the options are given for the first one.
Right.
Okay, so that council chooses option number 3, limit the maximum number of days a short-term rental can be rented and define primary occupant.
Okay, so that's on the floor and that's open for discussion and debate. Do you want to start, Councillor Butler, since you've moved the motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. This one is in order to address ghost hotels. This has been primarily problematic for a lot of residents in the area. And I think that this has been an industry that has been ongoing in Fort Erie for many, many years. And I've said this before that since the platforms have been up and running, Airbnb and all of the rest of them, it has made it a disruptive industry. And while it has boomed, it has made it problematic for some of the residents in the area. When we think of ghost hotels, it's my opinion that if you're renting out for less than 7 nights or 6 nights, it then becomes more of a party house than anything else. And those families or those individuals that are looking to rent for more than that, for the 7 nights, it then becomes a vacation destination as opposed to a couple of nights stay. I think the couple of night stays should be reserved for the hotel industry. And that's my opinion on that for now.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to that? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Just a clarification then, because the option 3, if I'm reading it correctly, limits the maximum number of days.
Oh.
So kind of contrary to what I'm hearing, because I agree with Councillor Butler that you don't want kind of this in and out. It's better for someone to come for a week or 2 weeks, and they will probably take more care of the property. So I'm not quite sure option 3 reflects what I've heard.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Councillor Noyes. I think it's more directed, but maybe staff can comment on that, and that would be Mr. Chidoba, you're there. Is that the intent with respect to option 3 under the policy heading?
Through the chair, Your Worship, if I can defer that one to the director, Dolch, please.
Sure, we'll do that. Ms. Dolch.
You to the councillor. Yes, the idea with that was the maximum number of nights to limit the amount of time somebody could rent out during any given season. So let's say maybe just for the summer season they could rent out. It wasn't necessarily the number of nights, 7 versus 2. It was more the maximum that they could rent out during the season in order to limit and make sure the primary occupant stayed in the house at some given time during the year or the season. So that was the intent of that section or that option.
Councillor Noyes, you still have the floor.
Thank you. That I kind of agree with what Councillor Butler said, is that if someone's staying there for a longer period of time, they probably would take better care and be more conscientious of their neighbors, as opposed to 1 or 2 nights in and out type thing, you know, party and then leave. The only other thing, I know we're talking about option 3. Can I comment on option 2 now or not?
Yeah, you can comment on any of them because this is under debate.
I would actually like to see option 2 and 3 combined. That I would like to see that we do look at zoning in specific areas so that we kind of remove them from residential areas that are further than a half a mile, let's say, from a commercial area. Not that all residential areas, but they should be close to the commercial areas or the tourist areas. And I wouldn't mind seeing 2 and 3 combined. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to weigh in? Councillor Dubanow. Yeah. I'll come back to you, Councillor Butler.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I have some concerns about option 2 and 3. And I have some questions for staff on what they're looking at. And I'm wondering if through you, perhaps Ms. Dolch can give us some clarification here. What would we be looking to do under option 3? Would it be to limit the total number of days without a year that it could be rented, but not limit the amount of time any single renter could use? Would it be a combination of the two? And the reason I ask is, you know, we have cottage owners, and this has been an ongoing thing in Fort Erie for many, many decades, and it's only become I guess a big thing with inventing these platforms that people use the internet to share these things. We've always had cottages in Crystal Beach and Waverly Beach and in those areas that have a phone number outside that say, you know, inquiries, give us a call. And I'm concerned if we do this, you know, so some of these cottages have been in families for years, particularly among American families, but we're also now starting to see Toronto families come in. And a lot of individuals, they use these cottages for themselves, but they supplement the mortgage using short-term rentals. It pads their, you know, almost the revenue to buy one of these expensive, you know, pieces of property. And I'm just concerned what impact this could have on them if we go this route. I understand the ghost hotel situation, the need to deal with this, but I don't want to inadvertently pull the rug under a family that has purchased something like this with the hopes of one day perhaps having it to share with their grandkids. And now all of a sudden we've changed their whole financial plan. So I'm just wondering if we get some clarification on that.
Ms. Dolch, can you clarify?
To the councillor. So the purpose of number 3, it's joint. It's a joint requirement to have the maximum number of days and the primary occupant, meaning that there has to be somebody that lives there at some period of time throughout the year. In terms of the maximum number of days, really that's up to us in terms of what we envision. It can be from 90 days, let's say from June till September, or it can be 120 days of rentals. So it was the maximum number of days, obviously, to allow what you're speaking of, that somebody can still have it as their residence, but rent it out on occasion. What it does stop is when you set the maximum number, doesn't stop, but it limits the abilities for corporations to purchase these and rent them out year round as some do.
Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, and if I may, Your Worship, through you again to Ms. Dolch, another question. I know that there is a short-term rental located in Ward 2. I happen to know the owners. They live on site, but they actually offer the rooms within their this building that they live on site year round. So, I mean, they use this as income. I mean, they live there, but it's actually their business. And I'm concerned, what would this do to them if they live on site? Would they now be limited by the number of days that they could actually rent rooms out on their short-term rental despite living on site?
Wouldn't that be a bed and breakfast, Ms. Dolch?
Through to the counselor, yes, it would. So if we put this in place and they live on site and let's say rent out a room or rent out an accessory apartment in their house, something like that, it would limit them to the maximum number of days that that unit can be rented, that short-term rental can be rented out. So it would limit them.
Councillor Dubanow.
No, I appreciate that, Your Worship. I have concerns. I'm not sure I can support. I don't think I can support option 3 at this time. I think we may need to flush this out a little more and get some more definitions, but I'm not comfortable supporting this.
I'm going to go to Councillor Zanko, and then I'm going to go to. So Councillor Zanko, you haven't spoken yet, so I'm going to go to you. I did see Councillor Butler's hand before, and then I see Councillor Noyes' hand again. I haven't heard from the other 2 councillors, so we'll go with you, Councillor Zanko.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple, I have a couple concerns and questions. I think this is a great report. My concern is, though, I feel as though it's not a one size fits all model, especially when I look at, Crystal Beach. I know that there's management companies that rent cottages out by the weekend. I know when we went through this exercise last term, the business owners in Crystal Beach, some of them had come forward and said how the local economy there depends on those. So my concern is, basically areas that these short-term rentals work really well, and then you look at areas like Ward 3 where they don't. It's quite the opposite. My other concern is, I still feel like we haven't really had a good amount of time to really look at this based on actual projections. So, I'm going to leave it with that. I'm interested to hear what everyone else says. But I do have a number of concerns here with the report.
Thank you. Any councillor who hasn't spoken yet? Councillor McDermott.
Thank you, Worship. On the first one, I'm more geared toward number 1, and it's mostly because of just what Kim mentioned. I think we have to do a little more looking into these ghost hotels. One thing I didn't see is a whole lot of information with regards to what other municipalities are doing in these areas, and I think that we should take a look at it. I think the other thing is the last time we did this, it was a pilot project, and it was a pilot project in the same situation that we're in today. We're still fighting COVID until all these vaccines come out. Nothing much is going to change with regards to people being able to rent these places. So we're still under the same restrictions. It's going to take some time. Now, I would like a more wholesome look at this, whether that takes more time or not. But I'd rather be right the first time than have to come back and correct it 2 or 3 times later on down the line. So, it's only my thought that for the first one, I would be supporting 1. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, so Councillor Lubberts, you haven't spoken yet. Did you intend to chime in on this issue or not?
Yeah, no, I think everybody's covered what was concerned about.
So I will go back to Councillor Butler, and then I will go to Councillor Noyes. It's very much sounding like some of you are uncomfortable that we don't have enough information, or you don't like the range of recommendations. So let's hear what you have to say, Councillor Butler, and then Councillor Noyes, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that. I made a mistake. So I misread that completely. I thought it said minimum, and we were deciding on a minimum number.
Okay.
So I totally blew that one. I happen to agree with Councillor Zanko and Councillor McDermott with respect to, defining what it is that we're looking for in terms of the minimum number of days. I'm not opposed to having a primary occupancy, but I do think that perhaps we should look at the ghost hotels a little bit further and ask some more questions with respect to that.
Right, so I'm going to go to Councillor Noyes, and then I'm going to suggest that maybe this part of the report should be referred back to staff for a further report with additional information and recommendations. But Councillor Noyes, before I ask anybody to do that, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Again, I don't necessarily disagree that we need perhaps a little bit more information, but I will say in response to Councillor McDermott's comment is that what I've seen from everything I've read is that most of the municipalities are actually doing number 2. They're controlling the zoning areas, and they're also adding the primary residence to it, so that they're really kind of discouraging the corporate short-term rentals. And just in response to Councillor Dubanow, is that again, this refers to short-term rentals. So in other words, my understanding of short-term rentals, anything that's rented for more than 30 days to one occupant, like, a 1-month rental, is not considered a short-term rental. So that person that you're talking to would still have the option of renting to 2 individuals for 30-day periods, and this wouldn't affect that because it's not applying to that. My concern is more the poor people, and I think we've all read the different emails from the poor people who live beside some of these with their families and their young children, who are basically the renters use and abuse the property. They take they don't take their neighbors into consideration at all. They're just really there to have a good time, and who cares, what the neighbors may think. We're not going to be here tomorrow. So I do think we do need to look at that, and perhaps when we go down to the other options, that there's more bylaw enforcement, then that may help that, and also with the fines and stuff. But again, when I read those emails, I don't think we get a ton of them, but I do think we get 3 or 4 a year, where if I was there, I would just put up a for sale sign and move. And I would hate to do that, but it really leaves me no option, because I'm not going to put my family through that. And I would hope that at least today we find something that's going to prevent that, or be able to shut that down if that occurs much more quickly. Thank you.
Okay, so would anyone like to move that we refer this back to staff for a further report with additional information and recommendations? Councillor Dubanow, anyone like to second that? Councillor Zanko, are there any? So there's no debate on a referral motion. So all those in favor of referring this? Opposed? Okay, so you're all in favor? Councillor McDermott, was that a late yes or an early no? Your hand. That was a yes? Okay. Okay, so then that takes us to number 2. And would someone like to move an option for item number 2, which is the enforcement part? Don't all rush and put your hands up. Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, I'll bite the bullet here, Your Worship. I'm going to move that we proceed with option 1, continue to monitor for another year.
Okay, anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Dubanow, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate being given the opportunity. I'm just concerned with the pandemic, whether we actually had an opportunity to actually do enforcement. I know from discussions that there was supposed to be a demerit point system where repeated infractions were supposed to lead to actually revoking a short-term rental license. And had a little bit of a discussion with the director earlier today regarding that. And I'm just concerned that we're not getting the true level of enforcement with what was intended, because the pandemic has kind of thrown us for a loop. And I'm just wondering, Ms. Dolch, perhaps, sorry, your worship, perhaps through you to Ms. Dolch, if we can perhaps get an idea of what was originally planned and what didn't happen this year due to the challenges of the pandemic, financial and enforcement related, just so we have an idea of why we may need to look at this for another year.
Ms. Dolch?
You to the councillor. So this year, obviously we've had some challenges with the pandemic. We did take on a contract position to deal with enforcement of COVID related matters. What didn't happen was council originally authorized us to bring forward through the budget in 2020 a bylaw officer to operate from May to September in the evening hours to monitor some infractions that occurred. And that was in relation to the demerit point system, so that demerit points could be verified. So if somebody called and complained about noise, a bylaw officer could verify and then issue the demerit points. And that leads to eventual revoking of short-term rental licenses over time. So that didn't happen. That is coming forward in the 2021 budget. We have identified that to come forward. So we didn't get a lot of enforcement, and obviously throughout the year dealing with COVID related enforcement matters, we haven't had a lot of time. We have dealt with some licensing issues that short-term rentals weren't licensed this year, but that's about the extent of our involvement. We've also recently gained a partnership with Niagara Regional Police in terms of noise complaints, and they're starting to alert us to any noise complaints they receive, which provides evidence-based facts for the demerit point system. So we're starting to get into that as well, but that was later this year.
Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and through you again to Ms. Dolch. I'm just wondering if, conceivably, if we do have this level of enforcement as intended with the demerit point system, which would lead to potentially having a problematic short-term rental license revoked. Do you foresee that we may actually, just based on some of the anecdotal information that we've heard, do you perceive that we could be in a position to start revoking licenses and perhaps actually deal with, I know it's a small number, but it seems to be a consistent group that are causing these issues. Do you foresee that we might actually see some enforcement and the licenses revoked if we are able to do this in 2021?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the councillor, based on what I've seen, again, it's only hearsay at this point, but based on what I've seen, yes, I could see that happening. Obviously, if we do get a bylaw officer in place through the 2021 budget, what will happen is we will, through the education campaign, which you guys fund yearly for short-term rentals, we will provide that information, a contact number and line, similar to what we did with COVID, who to call, where to call. Obviously that didn't happen this year. We didn't have that ability. And then hopefully, rather than calling the police, they would call us. We would obviously have the police there if any drinking was involved or any other matters, but we would be on site as well to issue demerit points, issue fines, and deal with those such matters that are within our purview.
So Ms. Dolch, just for clarity, are we talking about a status quo program from 2020 into 2021, or are you talking about hiring more enforcement human resources?
Your Worship, it is a new position, but it was identified in 2019. Council authorized staff to proceed to bring that forward to the 2020 budget. It wasn't brought forward, but we are bringing it forward to the 2021 budget. So it will be a new position part-time from May to September at this point.
Okay, well, it doesn't sound like that's a status quo approach then. Sorry, Councillor Dubanow, for butting in on you, but I just want to make sure we're clear on this.
Your Worship, the only reason we mention it as a status quo, and we do kind of mention it in the report, is only because of the fact that you've already approved that to move forward through the budget in the previous reports that went to council.
Okay, Councillor Dubanow, back to you.
No, and I'm actually glad you clarified that, Your Worship. I'm good. I'm ready to yield the floor, Your Worship.
Okay, anyone else? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you. I'm actually in favor of the option one, where we're going to have someone hired from May to September from 5 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. I think that's what we had approved in the past. It just didn't get implemented because of the COVID and everything else that went on. Just alone, there's 150 unlicensed STRs that if they can just even concentrate on them, and plus the complaints, I think the fines themselves and the increased licensing fees, if we get the 150 to pay, let's say 300 or whatever the amount may be after tonight, you're going to recoup the costs for the bylaw officer, and hopefully we're going to prevent those residents who are now getting like what I described again, like the nasty renters that they have to live beside. So I'm very much in support of moving forward with this. I think, again, if we do nothing and just say status quo, those people are going to feel really ignored and unlistened to. And I think they have valid concerns and valid complaints. And that's the only way we're going to capture the STRs. We need someone to do the paperwork and to track it down and to make them pay the fee. And we can't anticipate again what COVID is going to do, but whether it's still going to be here. But from everything you're anticipating, unfortunately, it looks like we may be living through another COVID summer. So, so there's problems already. There's 150 that are renting that aren't licensed. We do have problem hotels or ghost hotels that at least this person can then address those issues. And if we don't have COVID, hopefully, we're going to see a lot more rentals and a lot more turnover. So the problem is going to increase. So I do hope that we go for the option 2. Thank you.
So, Councillor Noyes, just for clarification, you started out referencing option 1. You just referenced option 2, but I think you were referring to some of the components in option 3. Because option 3 is the one that talks about checking out, investigating and obtaining information regarding unlicensed STRs.
But that, if I can, Mayor Redekop, it also talks about that in option 2. It says to respond to complaints of unlicensed STRs and problems arising at STR. So I would imagine if there's a complaint about an unlicensed STR, we are then going to track that down and make sure they become licensed. So
okay, let's get that clarified. Ms. Dolch.
To the councillor, and first I do want to apologize. I did say option 1 was status quo, would cover off the officer, but that was an option 2, the part-time officer, which is continuous plan, which is status quo. And I apologize for any confusion there on option 1 versus option 2, first off. Secondly, with option 2, we will be doing some ticketing and getting some compliance with unlicensed STRs, but it'll be a complaint basis only, where people call in and complain. We will not have the manpower to do active monitoring. I'm not saying if an officer's slow, he may have that time, but option 3 was the one where we do active monitoring throughout the year. Usually the short-term rentals are at capacity in the summertime months. So they usually are rented out anywhere in January, February, March for the summer months, and then they're off the system. So usually once somebody's rented out all their weeks they look to rent out, then they are removed from the system. So it's an active monitoring that would have to happen. And I'll let Mr. Chidoba chime in if he has anything else to add. I don't want to steal anything from his report on this.
Mr. Chidoba, do you have anything to add?
No, the director covered it off. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So Councillor Noyes, you still have the floor.
Thank you for that clarification. I did have an opportunity of talking to Ms. Dolch earlier today, and even talking about an incentive program And I did not know that we were going to get that other email that we all got about the person who spent 2.5 hours and found 13 unlicensed SDRs in Fort Erie. So I suggested that we actually look at an incentive program, almost like a neighborhood watch type thing, that if a resident discovers an unlicensed STR, regardless of how they find it, whether it's on the internet or whatever, there'd be an incentive that if they're proved correct, they get a reward. And that reward then is part of the fine for the STR unlicensed and working. So that way we kind of engage the public to monitor and to perhaps find. It's like, listen, that one person found 13 in 2.5 hours. That, you know, some kind of an incentive program to get the residents to let us know. And that if we had that bylaw officer, then they hopefully could then follow that up. So that was a suggestion I had.
That's an interesting road to go down, Councillor Noyes, and I wouldn't want to be applying it to other areas of endeavor. Councillor Butler and then Councillor Lubberts.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually am in favor of option number 3. It gives us someone year round and has the individual doing the research and could be used for other things as well, because as we know that the bylaw department is always swamped. So this gives them an opportunity to have an extra person as well. I think a decision should be made on this particular one tonight. We have been going back and forth for a number of years since my first term, and we have had the roundtable. We have asked for input from both sides of the table. I don't think that anybody is opposed to having a bylaw officer to take a look at these short-term rentals. Also, I think that it gives an opportunity to actually build a report that's robust and filled with facts because they're on this, you know, on a full year basis. I understand that COVID is going to change the landscape of short-term rentals for another year, but that's not to say that they haven't been available anyway. I mean, the proof is with the numbers that have been reported in this report. I don't know. I think that with the vaccines on the horizon and people gaining a little bit more confidence in the marketplace, I think you're going to see an upswing in this. I think option 3 is the best way to go.
Thank you. Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. My question is to Ms. Dolch. Last year, we received some complaints regarding these short-term rentals. Is that correct?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the councillor, yes, we did.
And we did have the officer from May till September. Did we not have an extra one?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the councillor, no, we did have somebody doing some parking enforcement and COVID-related matters during the summer, but not for short-term rentals.
All right, now, I guess my question is, if we brought in an officer from May to September, in your opinion, do you think that we would recover the cost of that officer? I think that it was, if I'm correct, was it 30,000?
Ms. Dolch?
I thought I saw a number where it was $30,000 for that, from May to September. Am I wrong?
Can you comment on that, Ms. Dolch?
Yeah, you're muted.
Sorry, I apologize. Through you to the councillor, it is about 35,000.
So do you think we would collect the revenues to pay for that this season?
It depends on, right now, if you look at the charts that Mr. Chijoba provided on the current rates, I'm just looking to see here. On our current rate of $300, we have estimated about 146 short-term rentals, which is about $43,000. Obviously, we have bylaw enforcement staff member that has to attend these, as well as licensing, our licensing operator. So those costs are obviously to cover both of those positions, a portion of those, both of those positions. So it's possible to cover a portion of the bylaw officer's fees with that, but not necessarily all of it.
Isn't the issue that there are a number of unlicensed, significant number of unlicensed STRs, and that would bring in additional revenue?
Your worship, yes, that's correct. That's if we do option 3, definitely we would pick up those additional licenses. We feel we could get quite a bit of compliance that way with active monitoring. Definitely, we would hope we could cover off those costs for the full-time officer.
Okay, so what did you say it was, 33? How much?
It's about 35,000 for the
35,000.
full-time, for the part-time officer, and then
Okay.
it's.
To me, I'm confident. To me, I'm confident that if you had an officer out there and they were also checking on complaints for unlicensed, we would cover the cost. And for 35,000, and then option 3, the first year would be, did you say 59,000? Right? Was
Right.
that the first year? To hire somebody full-time? Is that,
Mr. Cook,
am I looking at that right?
Mr. Cook, did you want to chime in? You're looking anxious there.
No, I was just going to, Councillor Lubberts is correct. It's 59,400 is, so if, if I'm hearing it correctly, we would have to actually license 117 new STRs to cover the 35,000. And what you're suggesting is we could do that in the first year.
Yeah, so my thoughts are either way, I'm confident that we would recover the money on the 35,000, and then for an extra 20,000, you got a full-time officer that's going to cover everything. And so to me, either way, but we have to do something. Councillor Butler's right. We've been playing around with this long enough, and it's not so much the cost to the residents, it's the residents that are having to put up with these nuisances and these people that are not operating properly. And I think that we need to address that this year, and we can't put it off for another year. So to me, option 2 or option 3, I'd be fine with.
Okay, anyone else who hasn't spoken? Councillor Zanko, you haven't spoken yet.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I do feel the same. I agree that enforcement needs to be done. And I'm just leaning more towards option 2 simply because I don't want all taxpayers to be bearing the burden of these costs. I would rather see a model like option 2 to start with, that we can recoup those costs. And then, eventually go to option 3. I'm actually the same as Councillor Lubberts. I'm not opposed to either. I would just like to see us cover the costs for this program. But I definitely think that enforcement is needed. I don't think we could go another year without any type of enforcement.
Okay, so the only councillor who hasn't spoken so far is Councillor McDermott. Did you want to speak? You're trying to unmute, is that it? There you go.
Yeah, okay. Your Worship, I guess if it's the best of 2 evils, I would have to go with 2 over 3, just based on the idea that this is not going to be, no matter what people say, this is not going to be a full year of this. So I'm pretty certain it'll end up being like 6 months. So if we have somebody in that part-time position, and I think we can get a good head start on it until everything gets rolling again. And there'd be less money to the taxpayer too as well. So I would probably suggest 2 over 3 in my case. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I may have been mistaken when I was understanding the intent of this, because I do want us to actually proceed with the enforcement that was originally intended when we passed the original framework, which is to get a part-time officer in there during the summer over the overnight hours so that we can actually monitor these and utilize the demerit point system, that framework, so that we can hopefully revoke the licenses on these few problem short-term rentals that we have. And my thought was we're moving option 1 because that was what we already intended to do, but it was because of COVID that we weren't able to do that, and we're hoping to do it into 2021. And if I misunderstood that, and it was actually option 2 to achieve what we intended to do all along, then I moved the wrong option, and I should have moved option 2.
So Councillor Dubanow, you would have moved option 1, and there was a seconder on that. Who was the seconder? Councillor Zanko. So Madam Clerk, I believe that I can permit the mover to withdraw option 1 and substitute option 2 as long as the seconder is in agreement. Is that not correct?
When, Your Worship, when we moved the individual recommendations, there wasn't a seconder. The report was already on the floor, but of course, Councillor Dubanow can make a friendly amendment to his own motion.
Well, if he didn't have a seconder, it wasn't even properly debatable.
Well, it's on the floor, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I take it then, Councillor Dubanow, you're now looking at option 2.
Yeah, yes, Your Worship. That was my intent all along. It was a misunderstanding of just what status quo was versus option 2 being what we originally intended to do, but things got thrown off track because of COVID.
You've moved, so you've changed that to option 2, and you need a seconder, and I think Councillor Zanko put her hand up. So she's the seconder. Okay, so we're now it's option 2 that we're looking at for all councillors. Mr. Cookett, the question that I have really relates to some of the emails that we've received, particularly from those who are short-term renters and who expressed deep dissatisfaction with the fact that there are more unlicensed short-term rental properties than there are licensed properties. So if we go with option 2, is there any capacity within the bylaw enforcement department to do some proactive searching, or is there some plan that you could contemplate where we could get someone that could do some proactive trolling to at least rely on not just complaints about unlicensed properties?
Yes, Your Worship. I was gonna mention this earlier, but I didn't want to muddy the waters. So I do like option 2, but I think to further that, we could look at getting a student at be a college university who could search the web and find these unlicensed STRs, and that could be a short-term 1 or 2 months position that we fill with a student who I know could find these fairly easy. My first thought was to suggest that we use Dan Turner, who is taking over short-term rentals, who is a computer wizard and so forth, but I'm not sure of his workload right now. So I was leery, or I didn't want to offer up him at this point, but I will have that discussion with him. If he has the capacity to do this, then I will ask him to. If not, then I would suggest that we look at hiring a student, because I think it's very important that we do this work and we find these unlicensed. And this option 2, I think, will go to the actual bylaw work that's in the field that is required.
Well, that's very reassuring. And I can assure you that anybody that's computer literate to any great degree is going to be able to go through and pick them off. One of my daughters did this 3 or 4 months ago and came up with a half a dozen in about 20 minutes. So that it's not hard, it's not rocket science. And you may find that Mr. Turner, either he or the other staff might be able to follow that. So we're at option 2 with respect to the enforcement. Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. My question is to Mr. Cookett then. short-term renter receives his license, can we not register that with the town on our website? And then going back to what Councillor Noyes was talking about, if a resident has a problem or if there's somebody renting, they could go to the website and see, well, that address is on the short-term rental list, so they have a license. If it's not on the list, then they can notify the town that they're being used as a short-term rental. And because, I think that the residents are going to be our best friend here as far as helping us find people that are renting short-term that aren't registered. Is that possible that we could do that, or is there some privacy things that we have to be careful of?
Mr. Cookett?
Yeah, through your worship to the councillor, and Paul can correct me, Mr. Chidoba can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we do have the database of those that are licensed that we do share with the police as well. I think if anything, we would just provide the address and no further information, no contact information and so forth. And I believe we already do that. Mr. Chidoba, is that not correct?
Through the chair to the councillor, that is correct. It's already published as public information. If it's a licensed short-term rental, that is available, and that is also what is shared with the police, so they will notify us as well.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, but the problem that we run into is navigating through a website to get to it. And that's where we need to have like something that you can just type in on your computer, short-term rentals in Fort Erie, and then bingo, it's there, instead of having to navigate through our whole website to try to find it. Because
that's something that we can leave with.
Get there, the people won't do it, but if it's right in their face, they'll jump on it.
Well, we'll leave that with our staff to sort out. I mean, I would think that if you simply typed in on the search on the website, you should be able to come up with that. In any event, Councillor Butler, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to, through you to Mr. Cookett, ask, are you suggesting then if Dan can't do it, you're looking at a student plus the bylaw person that we would be hiring?
Your Worship, that is correct. Yes. So a student, but it wouldn't be for the full summer, because if you add up the dollars in hiring a student for the whole summer plus the bylaw officer, you're probably at the 59,000. So you could hire a full-time person. I think this is a short-term need to search the web and get these addresses. And then after that, it's just a maintenance. So we need to get all these unlicensed ones originally. And then moving forward, it's an easy search to find the others. So that would be my approach at this point. And then next year we come back and see if we need to maybe build the option 3 and a new full-time position, which I think we're going to need in the future, not only for short-term rentals, but because of the complaints that bylaw is receiving. You see the numbers, and they're swamped with trying to keep up with the complaints, the property standards issues, short-term rentals, COVID, and all the rest. So they're overwhelmed with work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's why I thought number 3 was the best solution, because you get the best of all the worlds. You have someone that's dedicated to short-term rentals, but also floats throughout bylaw to pick up the slack on, not the slack, but the pile that's building up there. I suppose that if you were to go with the scenario and bring in a student, I know that the government is offering a number of grant programs to bring in students right now just because of the COVID, and to offer some relief with the municipality. Then, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Cookett, would the municipality qualify for those?
Through Your Worship to the councillor, it depends. Some years we do and some years we don't. I don't believe last year we qualified, but the year before we did. So if there's any programs out there, we definitely would take advantage of that.
And one last question, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Cookett, then. If we were to go with number 3 this year, would you find that it would be best economically suited for the corporation, as opposed to number 2, taking into consideration that, there is a need for it at this point?
through your worship to the counselor, you know what, I know Paul's not gonna want to hear what I have to say, but I'd really like to get through this COVID year.
Okay.
And before we make that decision to hire a full-time employee.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anything else before we go to the vote on this? All right, not. So the council chooses option number 2 in order to address enforcement. All those in favor? Well, that's pretty unanimous. So that's carried, which takes us to the next one, which relates to the fees. Any, Councillor McDermott, was that your hand up? Go ahead.
Yes.
Well, you were. Yeah, okay, now you're good.
I support option 1 here. And reason I'm doing that again is because it's very short. It'll probably be a very short time frame that we're going to be even talking about these things. And it would enable us to put together a fee structure that would be more suitable. And so I'm happy with the status quo on this one.
So I don't know that that's actually the status quo. Ms. Dole, it's not what I read.
As it can be.
This says, number 1 says implement a tier-based licensing system.
Just 1 minute, then maybe I picked the wrong one. I'm pretty certain it was 1 that I wanted.
It's on page 7.
Your worship, perhaps Mr. Chidoba can answer that one.
Mr. Chidoba.
Through the chair, Councillor, the option 1 is to implement a tiered-based system.
Yeah, well, it beats the other 2 options from what I see. So option 2 would implement a mat charge, which I'm not thoroughly convinced is reasonable. And then option 3 is to implement a mat charge and tiered-based license system. So the other option, which is option 1, is the only one as close to status quo as we get. Am I correct on that?
That would be correct.
So, so I'll be supporting 1.
All right, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Noyes, did you have your hand up or were you just waving to me? Okay. Councillor Zanko, you're going to second that? Okay. So that's on the floor for any further questions or discussion. I'll go to Councillor Noyes and I'll go to Councillor Dubanow.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. I don't see how option 1 is the status quo because we don't have currently a tiered-based system. And if I'm reading the report correctly, that would be more geared towards corporations who have more than 1 property. That they would, for each property, it would be increased for each property from, 300 to 400 to 700, whichever, depending on the number of properties. I don't see how that is the current status. I would think that if we wanted to keep to the closest would be option 4, which basically no enforcement changes, but an increase of $100 for the licensing fee. But I'm not necessarily for that either, considering COVID, and they're still going to be the ones that are going to be paying business license fees that other commercial places are not having to this year. I'm not quite sure why option 2 is all that different than what we're doing now, because we're still doing the demerits. If we had that bylaw officer that we've now agreed to in option 2, like a few minutes ago, do we not still have the demerit program, or is the demerit program part of the MAT?
Well, number 2 talks about the tax. So that's clearly different than what we have right now.
Well, we do have a demerit program.
But we don't have an occupancy tax.
No, okay, so the MAT's the occupancy tax, but where does the demerit thing come in any of these options?
Well, that would continue because there would be no changes to the enforcement regime. So that would continue on.
Okay, so the only change in number 1 then is basically that if there's an owner of more than one, each one will, okay, then I can support that. That's fine.
Councillor Dubanow, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually in favor of option 3. And the reason being is, and we're going to have to do a bit of legwork on our end first to actually contact the South Coast Tourism Association to find out how these, any accommodation tax revenue we raise for destination marketing specifically to Fort Erie, because I know it's an organization that spans multiple municipalities. But I'm in favor of option 3 because it gives us some flexibility. We have the ability to perhaps keep licensing fees, and we can tier it. I actually agree with the idea of perhaps corporations or holders of multiple properties perhaps being in a different licensing scheme. I don't know what the number should be, but it's an idea I'm in favor of. But I like the idea of the municipal accommodation tax because it takes the burden of the licensing cost away from the operators and it places it on the user. Now, when you're talking about an operator, their situations could be different. You could have an operator of one unit who runs on very tight margins. A $300, $500 fee for them could be, significant. It could have an impact on their bottom line greater than someone who is renting it out constantly at very, very high rates. $300 to them is just pennies. By implementing a municipal accommodation tax, that 4% that you charge the end user, the operator can pass that on. And 4% of $100, that'd be $4. 200, it'd be $8. You pass it right through. We can collect a lot of revenue that way that can be used for enforcement and also for destination marketing, but it doesn't impact the operator. It's something they can pass on to the users. It's a small amount for them to pay, but we collect a lot through quantity. So that's why I'm in favor. I think even if we don't necessarily implement an MAT this year, I think we should at least consider this option to start the discussions with the Tourism Association to figure out how we can actually ensure that any revenue we do raise, should we move in that direction, is only used for destination marketing in Fort Erie. Even if we decide to do this in 2022, I think we have to have that legwork in place. So my feeling is we should do option 3 to cover all our bases. And we go from there. Even if we decide status quo for licensing fees this year, at least we have a plan moving forward for when we do actually see the tourism industry recover.
Anyone else? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is my feeling on this industry, is that it's a business, and you have to account for business costs, and you have to build it into your strategy and your cost build out. I like the fact that there's going to be a tier-based licensing system. To me, that makes the most sense, and I would like to see it on increments of the number that you own. So I don't know what that would look like, but I also agree with Councillor Dubanow that there should be a MAT system. But I wonder if you can clarify for me, Your Worship. I believe that we had a discussion with respect to, we don't necessarily have to have a MAT charge. We can develop our own charge where it just filters directly into the town of Fort Erie. Is that not correct?
Well, Airbnb has a system whereby you can get them to allocate a portion to the municipality. The difficulty with that was that, and it could raise significant income if the STR is registered with Airbnb. If you're not, my understanding is some of the others don't have that type of system in place yet. They may in the future. So that was the drawback there with respect to that. So we could raise revenue tax without going through a MAT, I believe, through that system. And many municipalities do it through Airbnb. But I don't think the other organizations there yet. Mr. Chidoba, do you have any additional information on that? Do you know if any of the other systems, short-term rental systems, cooperate with municipalities to provide revenues to the municipalities?
Through the chair, your worship, for what we know at least in the region, there are not many municipalities that are currently using the MAT. There's a lot that are exploring it, but the only one that we're aware of would be the Falls.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a MAT tax. It's a revenue charge, and that's something maybe that you should be looking into, because even if option number 1 is passed, then we're still going to be looking at some additional revenue generating, whether it's a MAT, whether it's looking at Airbnb or the other systems, whether they're moving towards sharing some of the profits with the municipality or not. I think you're going to need to look into that. Councillor Butler, that's back to you. Sorry to make this more.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I would be interested to see something come back to us to say that the municipality itself could charge something strictly on its own, or to have staff have those conversations, as Councillor Dubanow mentioned, with is it the South Tier or whatever it is that MAT is collected, and see if it can be, if we collect it and it's from Fort Erie, it all gets spent on tourism in Fort Erie and not divided in the other municipalities. That would be of interest to me as well.
Okay, staff, I'm sure, is making notes of that. Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. I'm going to support option 1, and I agree that if there were some revenues that we could collect outside of a MAT program, that would be fine too. But I don't know how the other councillors feel about the upcoming resolution that we have, but we're looking at even waiving short-term rental fees for this year. And so
Nothing I'm aware of.
Well, that's what the report is coming up, consideration of bylaws to waive business license fees, including short-term rentals for 2021.
Excluding, with the exception of short-term rentals.
Oh, excluding, all right.
Yeah, we passed that report last week.
But yeah, I don't know that if we're not going to use the MAT system, then I would say that option 1 would be our best option right now. And we know that we're all going through changes. Business is hurting, everybody's hurting. And so we need to do what we can do to help them. But I think option 1 is our best option today.
Okay. Anyone else that hasn't spoken? Anyone else that wants to speak? Okay, so I'm going to call the question on item number 3. And that is council chooses option number 1 regarding fee increases for the next 2 years. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That then takes us to the 4th and remaining paragraph. Council directs staff to report back on the effectiveness of the short-term rental accommodation program by the end of 2021. The only outstanding item that we haven't touched on is the penalty for unlicensed short-term rental operations. And there was some suggestion in emails that we received that could be raised. And there was also the suggestion, I think, in the report that could be looked at. Is anyone interested in making an amendment to the report on that to include that? Councillor Butler?
Yes, I will make that amendment, your worship.
Do you have an amount in mind? It's currently $300, the cost of a license for 2020, which will be somewhat altered, but not significantly.
So it would be a penalty based on I know that if you don't pay your source deductions in time, you get a penalty of 10%. So I would say that if you don't register but it increases as you go along, right? So I would think that a 50% surcharge would be acceptable, wouldn't it? So if you don't pay, if you don't register, is that what you're saying?
Well, the
Penalty for
difficulty, I
not
think, yeah, the difficulty on that, I think, would be how we would ascertain exactly what they've brought in. If they're with Airbnb or one of the other major systems, we might be able to get that information. But if not, that may be difficult. So I'm thinking you might want to go with a flat fee, which is easy to determine, because if they're caught without a license and they've been operating, then that's the penalty. So instead of $300, something else of a flat nature for the time being.
So it would be in addition to the $300, wouldn't not?
Well, you'd be fined and then you'd have to get a license. So that's right. You'd be paying a fine and you'd have to pay for the license.
Right. So the fine would be $150, which would be 50% of the actual.
It's 300 right now. If you fail to have a license, it's 300
right now.
Most of the people that are licensed that we've heard from have complained that there's no real incentive for someone to get a license because they can operate without a license. And so what? They get a $300 fine. I think that's.
So then we should double it.
Okay. So you're suggesting $600?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McDermott? Is there any discussion on that? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. I had an opportunity talking to Ms. Dolch earlier today about the fine and that it was doubled. Like you would pay your licensing fee plus $300 as a penalty. But I understood that could also happen almost, in other words, okay, they catch them on Sunday. If they don't pay, they can then catch them on Tuesday. They can catch them on Wednesday. They can catch them on Thursday. And if I understood our conversation correctly, that even though we're saying it's $300, if they don't comply immediately, it goes up immediately, like the next day or etc. Am I correct on that, Ms. Dolch?
Ms. Dolch?
The counselor, yes. So what can happen is we can fine daily if they're still in contravention of the bylaw. It has happened over the summer. I do believe one had actually 3 tickets in one short period during the week. But again, they do need to come in to comply. Otherwise, they can get fined repeatedly, day after day.
Councillor Noyes?
Yeah, and I have no problem with increasing the fine. I just wanted to make sure council was aware that not only is it a $300 fine, it could be a $300 fine every day. And I don't know if those people who complain that, oh, it's just $300, that it may be significantly more than 300.
Well, there's a simple solution. If you're in violation, get a license. So that if you're fined, one would think the first thing you would do would be to apply for a license. And if my understanding is that, and Ms. Dolch or Mr. Chidoba, you can correct this, if someone makes the application for the license, there is latitude given so that the application can be processed before they would be fined again.
That's correct, Your Worship. Yeah, we do give them some latitude. If they've contacted the coordinator, we also give them some latitude, at least as long as we know they've reached out and they're in the process, we will give some latitude for that and not continually fine.
Okay, anything further, Councillor Noyes?
Nothing further.
Anyone else? Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Butler, she actually mentioned source deductions, and I cringed because I know how nasty some of those fines and penalties, anything related to the CRA is always nasty, and well, I'll just leave it at that. I appreciate this discussion about fines because as much as I support the short-term rental industry in Fort Erie and have had a lot of engagement with operators, I also know how much work that operators have put in to actually become legally compliant, to actually get a license. And it's very frustrating for them who go to all that effort to do it properly and use it as a means to promote and say we're legal, the municipality approves us, and then they see someone who just goes by the wayside and does it anyway and has no intent to become compliant. I think the fine almost needs to be higher. I think this needs to actually discourage, flying by the seat of your pants on this. There's always that adage that, you know what, you get a fine and then you comply. But we're talking short-term rentals where we need to know where these houses are for enforcement purposes, for demerit point purposes. I almost wonder if, I'm not a big fan of fines as deterrents, but this is one thing right now where I think, maybe $600 isn't enough. Maybe we got to go to a tiered structure where your first offense might be $300. And then if we're back a second day, well, now the fine's $600. And if we go back a third and subsequent time, now it's $1,000 each day, because there has to be something to encourage the operators to become compliant. And it has to be a financial incentive that it's going to cost you a heck of a lot more money than what it's going to cost for you to go into town hall and get that license. So I'm fine with the $600 if that's what council wants to do, but I'm just throwing it out there that, maybe we need to look at this, maybe refer it back to staff to get an idea of, maybe a tiered structure, maybe one large fine for repetitive infractions. I just think we maybe need to look at this a little more.
I think those are all fair comments, Councillor Dubanow, and I think that that's something that staff can provide us with comment on. That might be a year-end report type of deal, because if we're going to get into the tiered structure, which I think makes a lot of sense for people who insist on offending, that makes sense. But this is, anyways, you haven't moved to amend, so we're at $600. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this? Councillor Zanko?
Thank you. I am going to support the $600, but I do like what Councillor Dubanow said. The only concern I have is, staff resource and who's going to be following up on all of this. So I'm thinking that, if we do eventually move forward with the option 3 that we discussed after perhaps this year of a full-time bylaw officer assigned to this, maybe that is the time that we can look at, a heftier tiered fine.
Okay, so if there's no one else, the motion, the amendment is that the penalty for operating a short-term rental without a license be increased to $600. And so I'm going to call the question. Although, Madam Clerk, before I do that, you got everything you need from us on this?
Your worship, I need a seconder for the motion to start with. The council directs
That was, so Councillor Butler moved it and it was seconded by Councillor McDermott.
Okay.
Okay.
And this is an amendment to the original recommendation because my internet froze, so I kind of
Yes, this is an amendment, so this will be an additional paragraph to the recommendations.
Okay.
Everyone clear? All those in favor?
Your worship, one quick, are we going to have the opportunity to present other amendments before we move on, or should we do this now?
And no, we can't. We'll deal with this and then.
Okay.
Okay, because we still have one paragraph in the report to deal with. All those in favor of the amendment? None opposed, that is carried. Councillor Dubanow, you wanted to speak to the report still?
Yes, Your Worship. I'd just like to move an amendment that staff be directed to perhaps engage in discussions with the South Coast Tourism Association on what we can do to ensure that the MAT program, should we move in that direction, any funds we raise would actually be dedicated just for destination marketing for Fort Erie.
I'm going to suggest that we don't need to specifically address that because Mr. Cookett, I'm going to expect, based on the discussion that we've had, that you and Ms. Dolch and Mr. Chidoba have picked that up, and that will be part of the report that you provide us at the end of the year.
That's correct, Mayor. I took some notes, and that's exactly. I'll reach out to Carol Lee, who sits on South Coast Tourism, and get some information. Provide that in the report coming forward.
Okay.
I'm good with that, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay, so we're down to the final paragraph, which is that council directs staff to report back on the effectiveness of the short-term rental accommodation program by the end of 2021. Any further discussion? Any further questions? If not, all those in favor? None opposed. That was carried. Well, that was easy. So
we did it in one night too.
Yeah. No, I'm good. And I think that was, I think that was a very good discussion about a very important issue in our community. So that then takes us to the next resolution, which relates to the proposed changes to the building permit fees. And Councillor McDermott, I understand you have the resolution.
Mayor Redekop, could we take a 5-minute break?
We could definitely take a 5-minute break. So right now it's 9:11. Why don't we come back at 9:16 or 17 or thereabouts?
Perfect.
What do you need, buddy? Huh? Hmm?
No, I just lost it. So I'm going to change it to 2.4. Let me find it.
Got one right here.
I want to go to one what? A plug open? I don't know.
Can I get by you?
It says my internet connection is unstable.
We're not having any trouble hearing you.
Okay, I gotta same time Kelly and tell him to get me back in the meeting. Well, the mayor can hear me.
We can all hear you. Just can't see you yet.
I don't know. Kelly, can you hear me?
Carol, we can all hear you.
Yeah, you're
I
live.
can't see anybody. I'm gonna get out and have Kelly bring me back in.
Okay.
I had to change my internet connection.
Okay. So we have to wait for the clerk to come back, I believe.
Mine isn't very good either. It's a Stevensville thing, I think.
I can't even get Zoom to close down. This is crazy.
Well, can you hear, you can hear us?
I can. Can you
Yeah,
see?
okay. We can't see you, but we can hear you. So
I'm going, Kelly, is he there?
he's there.
I'm here, Carol.
Okay, I'm going to leave and come back in.
I'll watch for you.
Mr. Cook, can we proceed without the clerk being in attendance? Because aren't you, don't you also have the authority of a clerk?
I am deputy clerk.
Perfect. So then let's get back to business while Carol is working her way back to the meeting. And Councillor McDermott, you have the resolution with respect to proposed changes to the building permit fees.
Yes, thank you, Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Butler, that PDS 09-2021, the proposed changes to building permit fees, the council approves the recommended user fees and charges in Appendix 1 to report PDS 09-2021 regarding proposed changes to the building permit fees.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Noyes.
Just a quick comment, Mayor Redekop, is that I am surprised that we haven't heard from the developers, because if I can recall the last time we had lengthy discussions, maybe not last year, but the year before, lengthy discussions on any increases in permit fees, but that's fine.
I think the large consultations we had related to development charges. I think that's when the builders were quite vocal. I had a couple of questions, Mr. Jansen, and you've had a couple of hours now to contemplate them, and that is, how did we arrive at a target of 1 year's expenses?
Yeah, so those targets were approved about 8 or 10 years ago. The related report had a lot of the theoretical background, which I won't get into now, with issues of sustainability and flexibility. In this case, the target is discretionary. There are requirements under the Ontario Building Code Act that we put any surplus from building permit activities to reserve. That stems from history where some municipalities were generating regular surpluses that would lower taxes. So the purpose of the reserve is to offset costs of administration and enforcement of building code. We've been fortunate the last few years to be in a general surplus position. That wasn't always the case though. So in terms of the amount, I mean, I know we can point to a number of years where we did have continuous deficits. And at one point, I remember in our fees report, the cumulative deficit over 5 or 6 years was about $1.2 million. So the equivalent of 1 year's budget is quite discretionary, but it does represent the fact that it adds sustainability and flexibility. Just to note too, we are not forecasting any increase to the reserve. It's only when our actual results exceed budget. So we're not actively increasing it at this point with any part of our budget. We are, however, forecasting to use some of the reserve. I think it's 2027 and 28 when we are using it for some building division capital purchases for fleet. So that's the background for that.
So the report says that the target for the reserve is $821,000, which is 1 year's budget, which is the amount for 2021. Is that the anticipated expenditures in the building department for 2021? Yes. 821,000?
That's right.
So it's not reflective of the anticipated revenues.
No, we are still not quite at meeting budget with our fees. So even with these increases, we still expect our fees, although revenues are hard to predict based on activities and volumes, but we're still not quite in a full cost recovery position.
So if we had revenues of $1 million in 2020, and we had We just don't know what's going to happen in 2021. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else that has any questions? Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps through you, Mr. Jansen might be able to clarify this for me, because I'm concerned about approving an increase during a time where you know, as small as these amounts are, I mean, there's a lot of pressures on all sides right now financially, and I'm concerned about the optics of what it looks like if we do this, especially since it's a small amount. I don't want to see this snowball into something more than it actually is. So I'm curious, perhaps through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Jansen, what would we be looking at as a total difference here if we didn't approve this? What would we be pushing to say, you know, into 2022 or further? I know we do have that supplemental item that we're looking at doing with regard to a whole review of the department. So I'm just curious, what would the impact if we just said, no, not this year, let's just wait until we do that review?
Mr. Jansen, do you know what the loss of revenues would be, anticipated loss of revenues, if the increases didn't go forward?
Through the chair, if we do some rough estimates that the fees that are increasing other than indexing are about 10 to 20% of the budget, we're talking probably around $2,000 or $3,000 in revenue to the town. But you know, the whole point in using an annual indexing is that in this case, you know, inflation is low, and that's why the 0.6% is also low compared to some other years. So we have gone through years where we haven't kept up with inflation, and then we've dealt with it in future years where we've had deficits grow and it's harder to catch up. So you know, much like our water and wastewater budget was a 0.5% increase, this is something that does reflect the climate with the lower rate, and it does keep us in line with other municipalities. And the alternative really as well is that if you're not recovering these costs through fees, then it is borne by the taxpayer.
Councillor Dubanow.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I do appreciate that answer, and I do understand how the taxpayers would be potentially on the hook for it. They have been the entire time, because we haven't become revenue neutral through this. I mean, that's the point. So I mean, nothing would substantially change. My feeling is, knowing that we have that supplemental item coming up to review this, I would feel better if we just held off, and for that reason, I'm not going to be voting in favor of this. I appreciate the work that the department does in arriving at becoming a revenue neutral. I think we might have more opportunity to have that discussion when we consider that supplemental item to do the review. But at this time right now, with you know, stay-at-home order, lockdown, everything else, all those financial pressures everyone is facing, I'm not comfortable dealing with this right now. So I'll wait until budget time. We'll discuss that supplemental item, but for now, I'm going to be voting against this.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do feel the same as Councillor Dubanow with regard to an increase, but I am going to support this because my concern is that you know, the taxpayer is going to bear a bit more of a burden if we don't try to get this to more of a revenue neutral state. I know we're not there yet, but I just wanted to say, originally coming into this meeting, I didn't think I was going to support this because of the increase during the current climate. I even let Mr. Jennings know that was quite possible. But given the fact that, again, I think taxpayers are struggling the most, that's why I'm going to support this.
Okay. Anyone else? Well, I'm going to call a question. All those in favor of the resolution? Opposed? Okay, that is carried. And Councillor McDermott, who is the seconder on that motion?
Councillor Butler.
Thank you. That takes us then to new business and inquiries. Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. Recently, a member of the public has come forward with an email regarding a trip that I had taken in November. The writer had said that basically if I wasn't removed from council immediately, they would be contacting the papers. The writer also wanted this to be addressed very quickly. I was surprised by the email, but I figured the best way I could address this would be in a public setting, such as a council meeting. On November 21st, I traveled with my husband out of the country. I followed all of the government protocols under the Quarantine Act upon my return. Due to the recent spotlight on travel and higher level of full-time government officials traveling over the past few weeks, I've seen that residents were impacted by this. The fact is, COVID has changed drastically over the past 2 months, including a recent lockdown. In November, I would never have thought that me traveling would have offended residents or hurt them. I'm not a full-time employee of the town. With that being said, I did want to bring this to everyone's attention, and I did want to apologize if me traveling did hurt or offend any of my constituents. I do plan to complete my term on council, but I thought this probably would be the best way to bring this to everyone's attention. So I appreciate you letting me discuss this tonight.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zanko. I believe that residents should expect honesty, openness, forthrightness from their elected representatives, and your comments, in my opinion, reflect all three. So thank you for bringing this up. Is there anyone else that has any new business or inquiries? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. A few weeks ago, the council passed a motion in regards to added value to agricultural lands. And we were talking about barns that could be used for other functions, social functions. And one of the comments was that about development fees that could be waived. But in discussing this with Ms. Dolce, there's a lot more than development fees. It's not like someone who has a barn can say, oh, there's now added value. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. There are a number of requirements if you want to make your barn into a public venue. And I think perhaps we need some information on that, of what the process would be if someone did want to kind of like use their barn for added value, and what the steps it would take, everything from the zoning changes to the safety and the building, like the requirements for bathroom and things. I don't want people to go away thinking that, oh, I can, I have a barn, I can have a party, I can start renting it out. So my inquiry then is to Ms. Dolce about what would the process be if someone wanted to multi-use their barn for social gatherings.
Ms. Dolce.
To the councillor. So you are correct. It isn't just development charges. They're through the building permit process. They do require a change of use permit, and that changes it from an agricultural structure to a quasi-commercial structure, depending on what they're doing in there. If it was a wedding venue, things like that, it would be more of a commercial-based structure, and that's where development charges would apply based on that commercial use. The other things that would be considered are site plan approval. Site plan approval, although in an agricultural area is exempt, we do have the ability to require site plan approval for things that could impact negatively upon the agricultural area. So we do have that ability to at the discretion of the director, to determine that. And such things like a wedding venue, depending on the amount, and we'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, to be honest with you. Is there sufficient parking? Do they need to provide large parking areas in the agricultural area? Things like that. It depends on the type of use you're proposing. Let's say, for example, we ended up with a brewery, which is a value-added agricultural use in the agricultural area. Something like that would have a more significant impact on the agricultural community. So we'd be looking at a site plan for that type of use, similar to what we do for grow operations in the agricultural area. So those are the provisions. Those are the provisions. The official plan and zoning will be changed as part of that amendment. So the use would be permitted, those value-added uses, but the other items would not. You would have to go through those processes.
Councillor Noyes.
I appreciate that explanation, and I hope that the general public understands that there's more than than just there's more to it than just an added value. It's a process that has to be followed.
Thank you. Anyone else with new business or inquiries? If not, then we're going to move to motions, and Councillor Dubanow, you have a couple, so why don't we start with your first motion?
Yeah, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Zanko, that council directs staff to submit a report with recommendations with respect to amending fence bylaw number 70-2013 with respect to providing additional flexibility regarding setbacks and lengths for the installation of privacy screens when attached or placed next to a fence of open construction. And I'd like to speak to that, Your Worship, if I may.
Please do.
Yeah, this comes about with a situation in that occurred in Garrison Village with a resident who there was a change of use next to their property, and they had already had a chain link fence. And through discussions with staff, as well as the resident, I became aware of you can essentially buy systems that attach to an existing chain link fence. Some of them are actually very elegant looking. They essentially turn your chain link fence into a privacy fence so that you can no longer see through it. And with discussions with staff, we realized that would actually be considered a privacy screen. And under the fence bylaw, a privacy screen actually requires setbacks from the property line. It requires, it limits your length, but it also allows for a taller height than what a standard fence would. So my hope is, by requesting this report, that perhaps we can get some recommendations from staff with respect to how we can modify that section of the bylaw to provide residents with the flexibility to utilize these systems so that they can be placed closer to the fence so it doesn't take up valuable space of their property. And also look at perhaps the type of privacy screens, the height, other things. That way, this report here, council can take a look at it. We can perhaps get a feeling for what the amendments would actually do and what the impacts would be. And, if it's agreeable to council at that point, it would provide a benefit to our residents. It would give them some flexibility to do something that might be important to them that they can't do right now legally. So that's why I'm requesting this. I think it, with the growth we have going on in Fort Erie, changes in use in various areas, rather than having residents rip out, I still call them frost fences. I'm probably one of the few people in the world who still does. So they don't have to rip out their chain link fences and replace it with a wooden privacy fence, which can be very costly for them.
Thank you, Councillor Dubanow. You're obviously showing that you're hanging around with a lot of older people, if you're calling it a frost fence. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? If not, Councillor Noyes.
Just trying to get my head around it. So are we talking about any fence, but any chain link fence that someone wants to do, that, or are you asking for recommendations from staff in regards to the height and things like that?
Councillor Dubanow, what in essence are you looking for?
I'm essentially looking at a report with recommendations so that we can modify the setback and the length requirements. There are some provisions in the bylaw with respect to the privacy screens that allow taller height than what a fence is. And I'd be concerned how that would play in. That's the reason for the report, because I would hate to see the bylaw modified and my original thought was just propose amendments here that we approve now, and it would amend the bylaw. And then I realized you could be opening up a Pandora's box, and that all of a sudden we're allowing people to attach privacy screens that are 4 feet taller than the limit of a fence. So that's the need for a report, is to provide that flexibility with respect to the setbacks and the lengths. And I would hope staff, after this discussion right now, would also take into consideration that we probably don't want these to be any higher than an existing fence. That's the reason for a report. These are things that staff are going to catch, even though our intent here is to provide that flexibility.
And they will provide us with some recommendations as well.
I would hope so.
Councillor Noyes?
I appreciate that clarification. I would also think that the staff, when they're looking at that, would also be talking about sight lines to make sure they're not, in the turn it
For
into
sure.
triangle and traffic triangle and all kinds of things like that. So, no, I can support that. Thank you for the explanation.
Anyone else? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. That takes us to Councillor Dubanow, your second motion.
Postpone.
Yeah, Your Worship, I actually postponed that to the February 22nd council meeting.
I see that, and I see that on my agenda. Okay, then that takes us to Councillor Noyes. You have a motion.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. That staff are directed to review and recommend to council amendments to the.
Do you have a seconder?
Oh, I'm sorry. I did have a seconder. Can't remember who it was. Who wanted to? I think
Councillor
Dubanow, yes, because he has a sign. That's right. Councillor Dubanow was the seconder. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Dubanow. That staff are directed to review and recommend to council amendments to the sign bylaw number 119-2017 to provide regulations governing signs expressing messages, including that such signs may remain in place for up to 3 months without the requirement of a permit. And I could just speak to that very briefly.
Yes, of course.
I do appreciate the feedback that I received from Ms. Schofield and Mr. Jennings in regards to the bylaw, that we always have to take in consideration human rights and legal issues and to make sure that someone doesn't get offensive. So there's more to it than just adding, this, that there has to be some parameters and boundaries put on this. So so I appreciate if this goes through, I'm sure they're going to come up with some good recommendations.
Anyone else? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just, I looked at the bylaw 119-2017, and I just wondered which area of this motion it was relating to.
Is Ms. Stoltz, do you want to speak to that, or should I ask the clerk to speak to that? This really relates to the lawn signs that are only supposed to be up for a limited period of time, and there's a whole bunch of regulations that they relate to. This came out of the removal of some signs that were on the road allowance and on people's yards about a couple of months ago, I guess. But Madam Clerk, do you want to just speak to that?
Yes, Your Worship, through you. What we were looking at was adding a new definition that would be for these specific signs rather than amending personal signs, which are a different kind of sign as what we were dealing with a few months ago or a few weeks ago that had to be removed, and also providing some regulations surrounding it. So we'd be bringing back a report that would outline those two areas that we would do some amendments to.
I appreciate that, Madam Clerk, and through you to Your Worship. The reason I ask is because we went and deliberated on this bylaw for quite some time, and one of the motivating factors was the signs that were being put up and down the street on Garrison and many of the other commercial properties, and that's why I wanted to see how that was going to relate to what we tried to resolve a few years ago. So I'm good with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion? None opposed. That is carried. That takes us to notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion this evening? If not, then that takes us to consideration of bylaws. And are there any bylaws that anyone wishes removed from the package? If not, then Councillor Butler, you have the motion for first and second reading of the bylaw package.
I do. Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McDermott that the bylaw package containing 1-2021 to waive business licensing fees excluding short-term rentals for 2021, 2-2021 to provide for interim taxes for the year 2021, 3-2021 to authorize the mayor or acting mayor and the treasurer or deputy treasurer of the corporation of the town of Fort Erie to borrow certain sums to meet expenses for the year 2021. 4-2021 to adopt the 2021 water and wastewater budget to adopt rates and fees for the year 2021. 5-2021 to deem a certain registered plan of subdivision not to be a registered plan of subdivision, Paul Robert Colley and Mary Jane Colley, 3806 Crystal Beach Drive and 0 Crystal Beach Drive. 6-2021 to exempt certain lots in Plan 59M-452 from part lot control, Block 3, 223, 227, and 231, Alderson Court, Park Lane Home Builders Limited, J Hill. 7-2021 to authorize the entry into a development agreement with 2682384 Ontario Inc., Adam Bosco, 3356 Thunder Bay Road. 8-2021 to authorize entry into an agreement with Her Majesty the Queen and Right of Ontario as represented by the Minister of Transportation for the Province of Ontario for the Municipal Transit Enhanced Cleaning MTEC Fund. 9-2021 to establish a park naming policy for the town of Fort Erie is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That bylaw package is on the floor for questions or comments. If there are none, then we'll go to third and final reading, and Councillor Noyes, you have that resolution.
Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Zanko, that bylaws number 1, 2021, 2, 2021, 3, 2021, 4, 2021, 5, 2021, 6, 2021, 7, 2021, 8, 2021, 9, 2021 are given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under corporate seal.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? That is carried. Councillor Lubberts, you have first and second reading for the confirmatory bylaw.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McDermott. That bylaw number 10-2021 confirm the actions of council at its council and committee meeting held on January 11, 2020, and council meeting held on January 11th, 2021 is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Councillor Zanko, you have third and final reading for the confirmatory bylaw. Yes, I do. Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dubanow, that bylaw number 10-2021 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under the corporate seal. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That takes us to scheduling of meetings. Are there any meetings that anyone wishes to announce? Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. The Fort Erie Public Library Board will be having a virtual Zoom meeting tomorrow at 4 o'clock. That's no location to give because we'll all be in our own homes.
And what a better place to be, although too much of a good thing, I guess, can become tedious.
Too much of a good thing. I think you hit the nail on the head right there, Your Worship.
Yeah. Are there any other meetings? I've got a few that I just wanted to announce. The Crystal Beach BIA is having its annual general meeting Wednesday, January the 20th at 6 p.m. That is on Zoom. There is a Transit Advisory Committee meeting at 3 p.m. on January 21st. That will be Zoom. And on Friday, January the 22nd from 9:15 to 10:45, the Greater Fort Erie Chamber of Commerce, or South Niagara Chamber of Commerce, I guess it's called, is having a podcast about hot local issues, and I'll be one of the people on the hot seat. So if there are, Councillor Noyes?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Redekop. There is an Infrastructure Services Business Subcommittee on January 27th at 3 p.m.
Thank you. If there are no other meetings, then I'm going to go to Councillor Dubanow, who apparently was putting out bids to see who could second this motion.
Yeah, and everyone's hand went up really, really fast.
Another revenue generating opportunity.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McDermott that council adjourns at 9:46 p.m. to reconvene into a regular meeting of council on February 22nd, 2021. And if I could say really quickly, Your Worship, hopefully the Bills win on Sunday. I want to come back and be celebrating at our next regular council meeting.
My dream Super Bowl, Buffalo Bills, Green Bay Packers.
I've quite a few of my friends feel the exact same way, Your Worship. You're echoing a lot of sentiment right there.
Excellent. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn? That is unanimous. Thank you all.